What's up, everyone? Welcome to Ship Chasing. Already having technical difficulties behind the scenes here. I was frozen for a few minutes before we went live, but we have Leone and Ben Gretch on tonight. Pete, as you probably know, is on vacation and sending out pictures of his chest to the Twitter sphere. So it'll just be the three of us tonight. Guys, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm managing to handle a fast draft and some research for best ball data later in the show at the same time while the show goes live. So multitasking.
Are you still? Is that fast draft still live?
It's still going. Yeah, I've somehow not timed out yet, but I got two picks left.
Ben,
it's not a good team. It's not a good team.
I'm having a blast over here. I was sitting backstage for 3-4 minutes looking at your frozen face and Leone getting attacked by a spider because it was already on the screen, and reading these comments that were just roasting us for not being able to start the show.
Where's Pete? Yep.
It's a pretty good start.
They're not wrong. Yeah, so I should say that Ben, you're going to be with us for about the first 30 minutes of the show.
Yeah,
then we're going to following that, we're going to dive into a little bit of best ball discussion. Me and Leone have been chatting today on some different best ball ideas. So we're going to dive into that. We may end up doing a draft. We'll kind of see how that goes. But I wanted to kick things off because you guys have been doing all these projections. I've been listening to a bunch of the projection pods that you're doing. I find this whole exercise that you're doing for Establish the Edge super interesting, where you're projecting each team and kind of diving into the weeds on everything and kind of taking away lessons from that. But I wanted to just kind of pick your brains a little bit since you've been doing that exercise. I guess, are you guys essentially done every team now? Have you projected every team now?
Some of us have. Some of us haven't.
Some of us have a quarter of the league left to go still. I'm getting my projections done right before each show. It's I'm cutting it close. It's been a little bit slower going than I intended.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of work, so I understand that. But I guess from the ones you have done, one of the things so I haven't done projections in years. When I was doing them, probably the most serious I ever did them, Ben, was when we did a similar version of this exercise. And we were doing upside and downside projections in addition to the median projections. And so that's kind of immediately where my head went with this projection stuff. When you have something like the Raiders, so you guys were mentioning, how bad the offensive line could be. They might struggle to score touchdowns, that could affect Aaron Waller's touchdown rate. How much are you letting yourself put that into the projection versus trying to kind of keep more of a level head, or not put your thumb on the scale a little bit? Although on the other hand, isn't that kind of the whole point of doing this, that you're trying to incorporate that kind of context? So just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that first.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. One thing I really try to do is be fair in terms of my treatment for all teams. So, if I'm docking the Raiders a little bit because of offensive line concerns, I can't do that because I don't really like the Raiders, and then not do it to the Bengals because I really like the Bengals. You know what I mean? So you kind of want to treat all teams fairly. And I end up injecting, some of that stuff into my projections via efficiency expectations, play expectations. But it's also useful to have, the team win total for the year and their average team total over the course of the season based on all the weekly lines. That stuff kind of is injected into my projections. So the market hopefully is capturing some of that stuff. And then I might go a little bit further on some of the efficiency stuff for particular players. But in general, that's how I'm handling it, which is to say I'm tweaking it a little bit, but really not too much for things like that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I would say too. It's kind of situation by situation. I when you say that, I think of specific players like Stephon Diggs, who I'm very high on. I'm very high on the Bills offense, and so I'm willing to be very aggressive in that projection. I was very aggressive in my Shenault projection. Aggressive on DJ Moore. There's wide receivers where I know that talent is more applicable, the players that I am confident are very talented, I'm willing to be more aggressive on like their individual shares. As far as the team stuff, something we've talked about a lot on the show, like I've looked at some of my old projections and not been basically any better than if I would have just projected, and I wrote about this in my recent Substack, I would not have been any better than if I would have just projected basically everyone for league average volume. So I'm regressing quite a bit. I've come in like a little bit light on volume compared to Leone on a lot too, which is something I'm going to go back and look at when I finish all the teams and make sure that like league wide, I'm where I want to be, and the teams are sort of, you know, in relation to each other or where I want them to be. I'm going to have to make some late changes, but as far as like the thumb on the scale stuff, like the scenario stuff, like to me, I'm still very cognizant of uncertainty, right? Like we can think that and we have that take. And so I think then when you're looking at the data and you're kind of like, this is probably a fair projection, but I have a lean. Okay, I'm going to take off a half a play per game or a play per game. Based on that lean, I'm gonna be, you know, sort of like lower than the market on these guys in my projection. It's not something where I project like an outcome that sorry, Leon, but it's not something where I project like a very specific outcome that I think is potentially more possible than people are letting on, but is also not the only possible outcome, right?
Yeah, and based on what Ben's saying, like it's a little easier to inject, you know, some confidence in some of the play calling stuff where, you know, a team like Baltimore, we sort of know who they are to an extent. So I might not regress them as much as like the pure math would say, or a team like Dallas, when you get this coach speak about, you know, how fast they're going to play and whatnot. Same with the Bills. You know, we know from their offensive coordinator, like they're not going to run the ball. They're not, you know, so I feel a little bit more confident in projecting them being really to stay really pass happy. Whereas another team, I might be regressing that a little bit because I do have there's some like qualitative information as well that gives me a bit more confidence. And that's a little bit easier to quantify than say, you know, I'm worried the O-line's going to stink. I'm worried, you know, Dak's not fully healthy. Those things are definitely a little bit tougher to quantify.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting about that, and Pat, you were talking about sort of, and maybe you're going to get to this point. I want to hear your take on the concept of different teams and the thing that you were floating before the show a little bit. But one thing that I think is interesting about that, what Leone just said, is that I'm very low on Baltimore's play volume and very high on their run rate compared to how I'm regressing other teams, because I think their system is basically, the way I think of it is my error bars on their projection are a lot narrower. I don't think there's a lot of scenarios where they can suddenly be even remotely close to league average pass rate or pass attempts. And same thing with the Bills on the flip side that Leone just said. And I haven't gotten to the Cowboys yet, but when I get there, probably the same for them. But we haven't projected them yet. But what ends up happening is I've regressed all these other teams pretty close to league average because I have wider error bars on them. I'm not sure about them. And so it is kind of an interesting outcome where like I have a few teams sometimes that are a lot farther away from average and most of the other teams relatively closer to average in team volume. It's like I am taking a hard stance on certain teams almost unnecessary or like not unintentionally, just because my error bars on them are narrower. And so it creates this thing where like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's the way I try to think about it on the team levels. Like there's certain teams that I have smaller confidence intervals on, other teams I have larger confidence intervals on. And so then when I look at my final projections by position, I try to remember that. Like I have really wide confidence interval on this guy's team and this guy's team. So I don't really care where they come in next to this guy who I have narrower, you know, confidence intervals on. Like it's just where they wound up in the final rankings within 10 plus or minus 10 points. And I think there's a lot of ways this could play out. So it's not really an apples to apples when I get to the final numbers, basically. So I always try to keep that context in mind as I'm like finishing and looking where guys come out in my projections and things like that.
Interesting. So, I mean, for that last point, are there names that come to mind that you could put to that? Like guys where you're saying like this guy has a wider range of outcomes?
I haven't done
I think someone like
at my final. Go ahead.
You know, like someone like Brandon Aiyuk, for example, I think has a really wide range of outcomes.
Yeah. Young players generally. Yeah. I mean, I like all the rookies. I'm probably light on where I would actually draft them in my projections. That's a great one.
But like he's tough in a variety of ways. You know, I think San Francisco could lead the league in points, but like if they don't, you know, there's some drawback there. We're not entirely sure what their pass rate's going to be, what the target distribution is going to look like when Debo and Kittle are healthy and playing with him. And there are just some ways it goes really, really good. And there are some ways where he really disappoints, even though he's very talented. Like it can swing a lot of ways. Whereas if you look at someone, I think like a Robbie Anderson type, I think it's a little bit tighter range of outcomes where we know it's going to be a really condensed offense. His target share is going to be at a certain point. We know there's some uncertainty around Sam Darnold, but he's probably not like really, really good that he's,
right.
That Robbie's going to go nuclear. And like that's a much tighter range of outcomes for me.
Yeah. And to this point, like I think young players is a really good one. But also to my team point, like I have Jamar Chase. I just sorted my receiver ranks, right? I have Jamar Chase projected for 227 points, which would be a phenomenal rookie year. It's actually right above like Deontay Johnson, who is more stable in a projection. I have him for more targets and all that stuff. And the only reason he's actually going ahead of Deontay Johnson in drafts. The only reason I'm bringing that up is a lot of my other rookies are light in my projections, but that doesn't mean that I'm like just because I'm not high on Chase that I would say that I don't think there's also some risk with him. It's just the reason I'm using that example is it's more just that Cincinnati is one of the teams that I'm an outlier on where I feel very confident in their pass rate. And so I'm projecting them for quite a bit of pass volume. And it's almost natural that he's going to come out that high. I have T. Higgins a few spots ahead of him and Tyler Boyd a few spots behind them, have them all in the same ballpark in targets. And all three of them look great in my projections, which I just need to keep in mind is because I'm very high on Bengals pass volume in my projections, right?
Yeah. So question here from Drico out. There's these comments here from Greg Roman saying they're going to pass the ball a lot more this year. I guess I see exactly where you guys are coming from with the Ravens, where like they can say that, but they're still going to be the Ravens. So, but I am curious, like how much any type of comments like this you would factor in for any teams. So
I'm projecting the Ravens for 2.3 more pass attempts per game than last year, which is quite a lot. Most of my teams are going to be within that range of each other. Their run rate, just like the percentage of plays that become run, 3 full percentage points less than last year and more than 3 percentage points less than 2019. So I've regressed them a good percentage. But still, because their trends are so extreme, that still brings them in almost 2.8 pass attempts lower than any other team in my projections. Houston is the next lowest team in pass volume. So that's the question is like, how much are you going to regress them? How much are you going to buy that? You could say that my projections are buying that quote, right?
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same way. I'm actually regressing them even more than Ben, but I think like Ben's point is we want to be careful about regressing them too much because we kind of know who they are as an identity, and it's like I'm regressing them to a 53% pass rate from 48% in terms of called pass plays, which is a pretty big shift, 5 percentage points. But I think Ben's point would be like they're probably more likely to repeat 48% again than they are to shoot up to 58%.
Right,
and I might be regressing even like too much. So I think that's part of Ben's point with an outlier like Baltimore. Not that they're not going to throw more, but if we're trying to be like as accurate as possible, where are we going to miss? And you look at like the distribution of outcomes, maybe a couple times they throw like 55% of the time or whatever, but we probably get a real cluster around, 48 to 53, and we don't probably have very many outcomes at 58 plus.
There's to put like real specific numbers to it, there's about 5 teams every year over the last, I think it's like 7 or 8 years that throw fewer than 500 pass attempts per in the season. And so that's a very extreme low end. That's going to change when we get to 17 games. I had to adjust everything to do per game now, like Leone does. But about 5 teams per game per year that get under 500 pass attempts. There's only been 6 seasons since 2014 since they changed the illegal contact and defensive holding, which led to a little bit more passing. Only 6 team seasons that have been under 450 pass attempts. The Ravens the last 2 years are 2 of those 6 seasons. Last year they were at 406. If they could add 100 pass attempts, then essentially they would be right around the bottom 5 in the league, right? and they're not going to probably add 100 pass attempts. My argument to Leone has been, when you talk about those types of numbers, like probably 480 on a 16-game pace is like their ceiling. That's where they get really pass heavy. The year before they were at 440-ish, and they were down at 406 last year. Like 450 is basement level pass volume, and that might be their median, just because like Lamar scrambles that much. They call that many runs. That's just what they are.
Unless they're like inexplicably bad, that's probably what's like that's the only outcome I can see where it really gets weird is like they're inexplicably bad.
Yeah, that would be very unexpected. I guess not impossible. Then the thing you said about like looking at the team trends and your ability to project the team trends, and like you're off on a bunch, but like did you nail any of those? Because this was kind of what I was thinking through. It's like a very half-baked idea, but it's like if you were just doing projections for yourself personally, would you rather nail like half of them and like whiff the other half, or would you rather kind of get them all decent? And is that even like something?
Do you mean
were you ever nailing the team volume and then just whiffing the others, or was it kind of even did it feel more random than that?
I did in a few cases, but then when I looked at where I would have been if I just projected league average volume, I would have been like plus or minus 10 plays was what I was saying as like the super accurate ones. I think I had like 7 of those teams, but then there was like 9 teams that were plus or minus 10 plays of league average. So it's like I could have done league average and been even more accurate or super accurate with more teams. But are you asking in the sense that like if you actually did projections that basically didn't align with market, and then also the way that I'm hearing this is like you're building a portfolio of best ball teams and you're going to get a lot of different exposures. Like I think that makes sense. You'd probably want some of your stabs to be correct, and then hopefully those exposures and those builds are, you crush, right?
That's I'm kind of like thinking through like if you had like perfect information, not that you would ever project this well. Let's say you just like had perfect information on half the league, and the other information you had was absolute crap, and you didn't know which was which. Would that be better, or would it be better just to have like decent information on everyone?
It's tough. For me, I'd rather have decent information on everyone. Like my whole thing is I'm trying to just like pin down, what's the strength of every bet I'm making throughout. And that's where when you had kind of first asked the question, I'd misinterpreted it a little bit, but I was kind of thinking if you were asking me, like, if I was doing projections just for myself, would I like be more aggressive in the stances I'm taking to try and like exactly nail a team versus instead of trying to just be like hedging a little bit. And like, I think you want to be really careful about, attaching narratives to team, like going again back to the Raiders Bengals example. Like I have a negative sentiment towards the Raiders. I have a positive sentiment towards the Bengals. And like my interpretation of those O-lines being bad because of that narrative, like I could be like, well, I'm really going to dock Josh Jacobs on this bad O-line and then like not do it to the Bengals. And, whenever you attach a narrative to anything, even if it's really logical, especially when it's logical, you run the risk of in your mind, like this has just been proven in studies, like you overinflate the probabilities of that event occurring once you attach a narrative to it. And like, I think of like, even like we all love Antonio Gibson. We think he's amazing. And I don't want to get kicked off the show and make this seem like an anti-Antonio Gibson thing. But I was thinking about this in my mind today. Like, are we maybe a little bit overrating his upside because the narrative behind it's so easy, and we can attach it. And like, and that's where I like doing the projections, because I feel like if I'm decent enough, like I'm not going to like overthink the distributions too much. I have an upside case for Antonio Gibson weighed in that accounts for the fact that he could catch a ton of passes, but I'm trying not to like I'm trying not to double count that and then like give him another tiebreaker above other guys, because
boot him. Wait, that was way too measured.
No, but
it's a good point.
And like point. Guys, and also like the guys who are most likely to have the ceiling outcomes are the guys who are most likely to score more points to begin with, to an extent. Like we want to layer in some common sense on the distributions, but like we also want to realize that we're not great at projecting baselines for players. Like people, like the knock against projections is we take our projections too literally. But sometimes I think people who aren't using projections take their ability to think through the distribution of outcomes like they put too much emphasis on that as well. Like there's error in that too, I guess.
Yep. And Leone's answering this more practically, like how he goes about it. I think that's sort of what I'm hearing, and I go about it the way Leone goes about it. I don't actually take like hard stance. I'm kind of like trying to think outside the box, but I do exactly what he just said. Like I'm trying to like basically be as accurate as possible on all teams, and while also acknowledging I'm definitely going to be wrong. So I'm trying to like split the middle between possible, outcomes. And like I said, sometimes I feel like the error bars are wide, and like. For instance, my overall projections, I have a higher run rate than what I set as a target rate for my league-wide run rate. But I realize this every year as I get going. It's because the pass-heaviest teams are the ones that have an unexpectedly terrible year. They have a really bad outcome. So I was looking last year. Houston won one game. They had the fewest rush attempts, the second fewest rush attempts per game in the league. The team that had the fewest rush attempts per game, Houston won 4 games, had the second fewest. They were a lot worse than expected coming off 10 and 11 win seasons. And then Jacksonville won 1 game. Those are the 2 teams that clearly had the fewest rush attempts per game by over a play per game on everyone else. And like I wasn't projecting either of those teams to be as pass heavy as they were. Houston, in part because they're expected to be good again. They were coming off 2 pretty good years, or at least like an 8-8 team, not a 4-12 team. And Jacksonville, you just wouldn't expect them to be 1-15 and throw. They were extremely pass heavy last year. And so you get into this scenario where, like in your projection, since you're sort of projecting reasonable positive outcomes for every team to some degree, right? We don't know what teams are going to just completely tank. You're going to lean a little bit more towards some positive game script or whatever. There's probably smart ways to handle that. I'm sure Leone has smart options, but there's things like that in my projections where I'm sort of just trying to get close on all of them. I'm not going to take a stand where I say Jacksonville might be a 1-win team and throw every play.
Yeah, I agree. Right. It's also like super amazing that you didn't mention the Jets in there because they just still ran the ball and they just didn't run any plays. It's truly amazing. But yeah, to Ben's point, like something I do in mine is I look at like the expected change in wins, like just look at the actual wins last year to the Vegas total and wins the following year. So like if you layer that in with like pass rate over expectation data, like you can get a little bit closer, but it's still going to be very heavily dependent on, the team win totals are all smushed because Vegas doesn't know either, right? Like the vast majority of these teams are between like 7 to 10 wins. And like, those are the teams that don't throw things off. It's the teams that, win 13 games versus the teams that win, like Ben said, like 4 games.
Yeah. That's super interesting that your like league-wide trends aren't going to match what's going to happen.
I kind of know it going in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's going to be teams that tank. I mean, the year before, when I looked at all the team volume and everything in that CBS article I've talked about, the one I was farthest off on was the Steelers. And they were super pass heavy. It was Roethlisberger the year he got hurt in week 2, who hurt his elbow. I was 100 plays high and 100 pass attempts high. That's one of the teams I actually took a pretty firm stance on, was like their error bars are pretty narrow. They were super pass heavy the last couple of years. They're going to be pass heavy again.
Well, you're kind of right, because they came right back and threw a ton as soon as Roethlisberger's out. Yeah,
we sort of knew that was going to be it, but then what actually happened was way wrong, right?
Right. Well, so let's talk about those upside cases that like Leone you're doing, and I guess just in general, like Ben, you talked about how there's kind of like a range and stuff with some of these teams. Like that part of it, I think intrigues me the most. Like where you get in the weeds and like you either realize like this upside case is really easy to make, or like when I'm setting this, like I'm picking a middle ground of something that's like extremely far. Like that seems like really valuable information to me.
That's the stuff that I take the most from project. That's why I like doing it. I think we've talked about it on the show a lot. These scenarios on our pod. I can't think of any great examples off the top of my head, but I agree with you. I mean, I think that's what you should get out of projections, not final numbers that you're comparing and acting like they're,
Yeah, I'm sure because Pat, you asked Ben like if there were situations he nailed or didn't nail last year, and like I'm thinking through last year, like some of the things projections got me on that I think were right. Like going into the season, off season, I was pretty high on Cleveland's passing attack as an upside, and then when I'm doing projections and I'm looking at Cleveland's historical play calling, Stefanski's historical play calling, I backed off that, and I'm glad I did because they were very run heavy. And it's like weird where I kind of got lucky to not so much lucky, but this year I'm treating them differently because there was some trend data towards the end of the season that says, oh, maybe they're going to shift and like be a little bit pass heavier. But like, Tampa Bay was one. We're doing projections really helped on Brady just because you work receiver out. And it's like, oh my God, some of the highest yards per target guys in NFL history he's playing with. And if the receivers like as bad as Brady was last year, it's like such a shift in receivers. And then Dallas was one, Dak of course gets hurt, but was really bullish on Dallas, just injecting that play calling stuff. And so like there are some situations you can now and can help, and like being bullish on Dallas could have won you a lot of money last year if Dak didn't get hurt. The flip side would be like I can think of some players in particular, not so much teams, but players where the target share maybe like I was overconfident in Juju bouncing back. I was maybe a little overconfident in Mark Andrews stepping in to this bigger role and like maybe not scaling that appropriately. So there were things where doing the projections hurt me a little bit as well, but you're just trying to again just figure out the strength of what the bet is.
All right, guys, I think I gotta get going. Got a draft in 15 minutes here that I gotta run to, but this was a good chat.
Good chat.
You guys enjoy best ball. I'm no help on best ball anyway.
You are helpful on best ball. You don't need to denigrate yourself that.
See.
He's like, don't pander to me. I'm out of here.
All right. So I wanted to talk to you, Leone, about a couple best ball topics now. Let's start with the tight end thing. So you've mentioned this on a couple pods, and I think I have the opposite take. So you've talked about this tight end being an elite tight end being more valuable in best ball than in managed leagues. And I guess I would like to just hear you explain why you think that is, because my intuition is that it's the opposite.
Well, I mean, first off, like we kind of see this reflected in the ADPs, right? Like the ADPs in any redraft, the tight ends are going to be lower in managed than in best ball. And maybe too, I'm thinking a little bit too much of like my personal cases, like where I'm taking Mark Andrews and Hawkinson in round 6. Like I'm thinking of that, like maybe a little bit more than like the Kelsey outcome.
That's what I'm thinking of more, like Kelsey, Kittle, Waller. Like those guys seem even more valuable to be managed.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I guess in managed, like I'm just like hyper obsessed in winning with 4 wide receivers. And I feel like in best ball, because I can make up for that a little bit and I don't have to draft, wide receiver times 6 out of the gate to do that. Like, not that you have to in managed either, exactly. But like I can make up for a little bit less quality on wide receiver with some quantity. And as a result, there's less opportunity cost in taking that elite tight end early in best ball. So it's just kind of like, I think the opportunity cost is just a little bit higher in best ball. It's higher in managed because getting those really high end wide receivers is super important and like continuing to bang them out. But I do think there's a super interesting conversation between, my 12 team league I'm playing in versus the Football Guys Championship, and it might, like, I'm starting to think like some of these bigger tournaments that it shifts back to the best ball kind of mindset where you're trying to hit the nuts a little bit more. And you do want to take that risk of taking the elite tight end early, because if you hit on it, like nobody can match that like somewhere else. Whereas receiver, maybe instead of taking 6 early, you take 5 early, but if you hit the parlay on 4 of those 5, like you're fine anyways. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what I was thinking. Like if you have like a Kittle team advance or, Waller Kelsey team advance, then like maybe you can find that wide receiver starter over the course of the year that's going to, put up a big,
or you just hit it in the draft. I mean,
right.
Like in a 12-team league, I'm just a little more conservative where it's like I just know I want that edge so much that I might take 6-7 wide receivers in the first 8-9 rounds. And like almost no matter what happens, right, I'm going to beat people with those edges. But in a tournament, maybe I'm like going to count on getting the early wide receivers I took a little bit more right. And in a tournament too, when you advance to like the final round, even if you beat like a majority of Kelsey teams and like Kelsey does what he did last year, it does seem hard to beat all of the Kelsey teams. I'm not even sure what won last year. I'm guessing Kelsey was on the roster, but I don't actually know for like the Football Guys main event and stuff.
Yeah, I guess I completely agree about like Hawkinson and Andrews and like Higbee and Goddard. Although Goddard's ADP might be about to fall now that the Ertz might be staying, but those guys definitely are less appealing to me. But I would say they're more the middle class.
So like 2-3 turn in like a regular PPR league, for example, I'm probably taking AJ Brown and Justin Jefferson and passing on Waller and Kittle, I think. But I don't know. Whereas best ball, I'm like almost always grabbing one of those two tight ends if they're there. I don't know if that's right either. Like I don't feel as super strongly about, like I feel strongly about about like the Andrews Hawkinson like being more valuable in best ball. But like as far as Kittle and those guys, like I don't know. And even Pitts I'd throw in that. Like I don't like my guess is Pitts is just gonna go way too early in most redraft leagues for me, like redraft manage, but I don't know. It is interesting to me. Like I'm not sure even in my home leagues exactly what to do with tight end. And then the other aspect too is if you're in like a casual home league, you might sort of know you're going to crush people on construction and you're just better at picking the wide receivers later, where you would want to take that tight end advantage because it can't be replicated in any like you can't replicate that by being really good at late tight end picks. Like it's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, that's I guess why I was like thinking like, okay, I still have an advantage that can't be replicated. I have the same advantage that I get with an elite wide receiver in manage, where I get to plug them in my lineup every single week and never have to worry about like, is this the week where Mo Cox catches a touchdown or whatever. The other guys, it's a little bit different than wide receiver because someone was pointing out in the comments here that like a lot of the tight ends that you end up starting with the course of the year come out of nowhere. Devin was pointing out, it's like, no one was drafting Trey Burton or whatever in best ball. And there's guys like that every single year that come off the waiver wire. Robert Tonyan, no one drafted. Like Logan Thomas wasn't drafted that much.
Yeah, last year was, but like running backs, you can get guys that are top 6 RBs on the week. Like no one's going to match Kelsey off the waivers. Right. I guess no one's going to match CMC, but like outside of like CMC and Cook, the right guy in the right role, it could happen. But maybe that's overstated now. It seems to happen like less often. Like we get less situations like the Pittsburgh situation we used to have when Bell would be out, where we'd, legit walk into D'Angelo Williams putting up 20 points a game or James Conner or whatever.
Right. Well, like and tight end's interesting too, because it's like it's a bit like running back, where there's a couple guys that really matter, and then everyone else you can kind of find off the scrap heap a lot of times. But on the other hand, I think it's more projectable than running back. Would you? I mean, again, sticking to the top three, the elites are more projectable. Right?
The elites are like fairly predictable, and we're starting to see that with quarterback a little bit too, which is interesting. I almost think I was thinking about this too. If you were playing like Football Guys Championship tournament, I think like the best strategy might be, if you were really going for it, as much as I love like Lance and Fields, it would be like first 9 rounds, 7 receivers and an elite at each of the onesie positions, right? Like something like that.
And then, so full 0 running back, but elites.
Full 0 running back, but get elites at the onesies.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I guess so. This is something I want to talk about too, right? The upside for playoff leagues, best ball tournaments, whatever, with 0 running back. Like, does that have, because you're not going to have an elite, and it's not even a onesie. It's a, you start 2 of them. You're not probably going to have an elite running back. That's very unlikely with a 0 running back build. You're not conceding the running back position with 0 running back, but your odds of like nailing a truly elite running back with a 0 running back build are very, very small. And that's not really the goal. The goal is to smash at the flex and make the what most people are going to have pretty low scoring running backs. You're just going to be lapping them in the flex and making up for the running back points with decent running back scoring. like something like Football Guys, where like in that build that you said, I mean, does that concern you at all? Like to still probably not have access to those elite running back scores
in Football Guys or in best
yeah,
ball?
like in football.
A little bit, which is why I like getting the first or second pick is so amazing. Like McCaffrey and Dalvin.
I agree.
Yeah, I think a little bit, but like those teams that have those running backs like don't have the receivers you drafted early. And in best ball, some of the teams where that happened can make up for those wide receivers just with distributions and quality, or they can get at least a little bit closer. But in managed, like if you're rolling out, Diggs, Ridley, Cooper, Lamb as your 4 receivers, you just might have such a huge edge in the pick your starter league where you have to pick those 4 guys and then it's really tough for people to make up for that. The people that drafted running backs early, it's like there's less ways for them to make up for it. It's not that they can't, but they have less outs to do so than they do in best ball.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
and maybe it's closer than I'm making it seem, but like I think there's a difference, but maybe it's not a huge difference, but that's sort of how I'm thinking through it. And I don't necessarily know if the 0 RB teams have less upside, like in the best ball tournaments at the end. I think if I were to take a hyper fragile team and a 0 RB team, and I knew they were like both going to hit like super amazingly, I'd probably take the hyper fragile team just because I think like over the 3 uncorrelated weeks, like hitting that high end running back parlay and then being able to like play the roulette wheel on healthy receivers is probably a little bit better than like the opposite. But that's just conjecture. And I don't think even still, like, I don't think it would be a tangible difference. I'm drafting both types of structures.
Right. And the one elite running back structure is also, and that feels intuitively to me to be the highest upside team, because if you have that one running back who's kind of the guy, then you don't have to just play the roulette wheel with the healthy wide receivers. You can actually have like, potentially 2 extremely good wide receivers paired with that running back. But when you do that structure, if you miss on that running back, your team could be dead. So it's also, it's like, I like that structure a lot. And this is like partly why I want to talk to you about this, because it's like one of those weird things where I feel like in best ball season, I feel like I'm like, Mike, why are you taking so many running backs? And then now I'm like, we've started drafting in the main event and stuff, and we've drafted 3 teams so far. We've drafted 2 main event teams and a Football Guys team, and we took a running back at the 111, and we had the 111 in all 3 drafts. We took a running back at the 111 in all 3 drafts, and then we went with the single elite running back structure. But it sounds like you're like, I'm actually the running back guy in that conversation.
I think you might be. Yeah. It's hard for me to say because I haven't done a ton of those. And I did take Derrick Henry with Sam Hoppin, where he fell to like 109, 110. And like seeing some of your stuff on the RB ceiling is making me regret that pick a little bit. Whereas I think if I drafted now, like I probably wouldn't have done it, but I don't think I would have taken another running back over him. I think I would have gone 0 RB. I'm like pretty full 0 RB in the, I don't know, like it's, I guess I'm like, I'm really conscious of like going back to the projections conversation where I was talking strength of bet. Like I'm trying not to be too overconfident in particular players or particular strategy, where like there's certainly a break even point where I'd take, Antonio Gibson in round 2 as part of my managed league build, right? Like I think there's a break even point there. It's just, I'm trying to like, but I'm not going into it saying like, oh, I need a hero RB strategy to be able to win this tournament. Like I'm not like that defined. I guess maybe I'm a little bit more flexible, but I'm leaning more towards the 0 RB build in the managed leagues.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not saying that either, but it's just like, if you're, especially with the McCaffrey, like if McCaffrey stays healthy this year, Well, I don't know. I'm like, I guess trying to think through this. Like, if McCaffrey stays healthy in the main event, how do you beat McCaffrey? Do you beat McCaffrey by hoping you also find like a guy who's going to break out? Like, I think CEH has a ton of upside. I think Antonio Gibson has a ton of upside. There's guys who do have upside to like pop into that 25 plus point per game range, but maybe they don't. And there just isn't that guy this year. There just might not be that guy this year. You can't just like magically wish for that guy to exist if he doesn't exist.
I get like the way you beat McCaffrey, I'd say is, like Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs can match him point for point over 3 weeks, right? And I think you have a more it's almost easier over the course of the season for you to.
Leone?
Shit. Hey.
Am
I back?
You're back. I couldn't tell if I was your foot. Oh, Leone's freezing. This is a nice screenshot if anyone wants to grab it. I guess I should say, like, as I'm trying to think through this thing, like, I guess I don't know why I have this, but I feel like I sometimes have to like talk myself into zero running back again. Like I like gradually drift back towards the running backs, and I have to come and say like maybe I shouldn't be drafting the running backs at all. Like, so for example, like Antonio Gibson at the 111, I'm happy with that, but we passed on Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill, and I think about that a lot. I think about that we could have a Tyreek Hill team or a Stephon Diggs team. And then that team happens to have Darrell Henderson. So it's like, now that I have Darrell Henderson on that team, I'm not sure that I want Gibson now. Like, I actually feel less confident in Gibson's upside case now that I don't need it to happen. Right? Which I think tells you, like, I think we're sort of telling ourselves stories a little bit with these running backs. And I want to like stop doing that as much as I can, because it's not just with zero running back. It's not just that you have a ton of upside with a guy like Stephon Diggs becoming the next, Antonio Brown, just dominant wide receiver season, or Tyreek Hill getting like a 30% market share and keeping the efficiency. Like, you have that upside, but then also those guys aren't going to suck this year without injury. Those guys are going to be really, really strong. Like, they're earning their targets. No coach is deciding whether or not to put them on the field and give them the ball in that play. Like, they're going to have super strong seasons. And so I'm just like almost regretting already not going zero running back there. So I feel good about the team, but it makes me want to draft a little bit more of these zero running back managed teams. Okay, here's Mike again. I don't know if you heard any of my vamping, but
I did a little bit. All I heard is you're a fraud and you're like scared of not taking a running back. That's like mostly what I got out of it.
Well, I do feel like I drift towards, like, if I don't think about it, I'm like, it just feels more comfortable to take the running backs, which is a weird thing because they're actually more risky. So there was a period where I was first doing the Best Ball Mania teams where I just like didn't have much Diggs or Hill, because I'm like, oh, I'll do one elite running back and then I'll take the wide receivers. But then you don't have any Diggs and Hill, and they could just be the guys you need this year. So that's sort of a silly thing to do, especially when you're preaching wide receivers all the time.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I don't have a ton to add to that because I feel similarly. Like, it's definitely tough, and that's why I've really been mixing builds. Like, I'm not afraid to some drafts just out of pure randomness when I'm out of the 12 spot. Like, I've done drafts that start Eckler Mixon. I've done drafts that start Diggs Ridley, like, and I've done starts that start Diggs Gibson. I've really mixed and matched, like sometimes to the point of randomness. Lately, I've been doing more one RB, one wide receiver, just because we've been getting these wide receiver heavier draft rooms, and that gives me this flexibility to kind of go, based on what room I'm in. Like, I can figure out pretty quickly what room I'm in and go from there. But yeah, in FFPC Best Ball, if I'm on the clock at 111, I'm probably starting wide receiver, elite tight end. I think it would be my preferred start. And I do kind of want to hop into some of these and grab Devontae Adams before he starts going as early as 105.
I know, right? Yeah.
Like get a turn pick. That's what I was going to, I was going to see if we could sneak into an NFFC draft. But I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, like get Adams Diggs or something at the turn, would be fun.
That'd be so good. The other thing that it occurred to me that on that team that has Darrell Henderson, I feel less confident in Antonio Gibson now because now I don't need him as much. You know what I mean? It's the sort of the story you're and kind of to your point about Gibson earlier, it's there is a narrative with that. I mean, to see the upside with any of this stuff, you have to kind of get into the narratives and
100%.
That's what there's scenarios, you're thinking through scenarios, but then you start to think those scenarios are what's going to happen to a degree. So
and it's hard too, where it's Gibson has this really clear narrative scenario, right? Whereas someone else might just be well, we think they're going to score a lot of points, and maybe they end up scoring even more points than that. There's not really a narrative; it's just kind of randomness. Beimfohr is probably.
Right, well, I started talking about drafting running backs, so Eric's here to talk some sense into me.
The moment I hop in the chat, I've been busy all night. I'm upset I missed the first 45 minutes. I hop in and Pat's I'm the one telling Leone we need to draft running back. And I'm well, okay, what the fuck is going on here? Well, you're coming on my show tomorrow, and we're not doing this shit that you're doing right now. We're not doing this what you're doing right now with Leone. No, but seriously, I actually really enjoyed what you guys were talking about, and the wide receiver running back bit is really fun on Twitter, but it is this insane push and pull that you're constantly feeling because I'm more of a zero RB person at heart, and so what Pat was describing is what I go through constantly in these drafts, and so I am really curious about what you guys just overall kind of think about that thing It's so nuanced, it's impossible to figure out an answer. But like you said, if CMC doesn't go down and you take an early running back, are you really just drawing dead? Like Mike, you were talking about, how do you beat him? Well, you probably beat him with Diggs and Devontae, right? You catch up at wide receiver. But
and then you've got replaceable running back scores, and he's got a wide receiver that is fringy and could, put up a 5 on a week. I mean, I was going
through. So it's funny you guys brought this up because I was going through my teams so far. I got a spreadsheet of all of my drafts, and was just kind of everybody's curious about where their Henderson and Akers stuff looks. And I'm looking through Henderson teams, and you're if you have Henderson on this team that has the 2 early running backs, you took Eckler and Gibson. It's is that a wasted Henderson thing because of what you're talking about? If you don't have CMC, maybe even Dalvin, I don't know if Dalvin fits, but let's just say CMC. If you don't have CMC, even though you have those 2 guys, and now you have Henderson, who's this let's call him a 3rd round running back in the 12th round. Are you are you even still alive? You know what I mean? I'm going through and I'm where are my CMC where are my CMC anchor teams with Henderson, with flyers so that's what you guys are talking about. So interesting to me because that's the push and pull I'm constantly having too. It's I love Gibson, I like CEH, I like some of these guys, but how do I really tackle that? Physically with real life examples, not we can babble about it all we want, but when you go into the draft and you get the 8th pick, what do or you get the 11th pick? The worst is you get the 11th pick and Diggs, Hill, and Kelsey are all gone. Now what do you do?
We also have a little bit more variance in the underdog tournament in the playoff weeks too, with it being, CMC just has a 15-point week or something, right? And those teams could be out, I mean, the tournament 2 years ago, Adrian Peterson had a big week, and it was all Adrian Peterson teams that advanced. There's just some funky things that could happen where you might not have a running back that matches CMC, but you advance, and most of the CMC teams didn't. Like just on 1 week, he outscored CMC by 10, right? Like you don't need him to do it over. You don't need him to do it over the whole 3 week stretch. You just need to do it on the
one time,
right week.
Yeah.
Can you pull up those the actual teams from last year? These are like the highest scoring teams.
Okay.
This
isn't gonna look pretty. And someone who's a better coder than me is going to probably make fun of the way that I do this. But, okay.
Make it bigger?
Okay. These are the top 0 running back teams from last year. So these are teams that took 0 running backs in the first 5 rounds and took more than 6 running backs. These were the highest scoring teams in the regular season of the Best Ball Mania tournament. And you can see like people do dumb shit and they get away with it if they have the right players. This guy took Travis Kelce in the first, Mark Andrews in the 4th, and still took a 3rd tight end, right? Like,
wow.
Like, but he's got a late Antonio Gibson. He's Darrell Henderson, who we were talking about. Jerick McKinnon had really high win rates. He's got a wasted pick in, Benjamin. Like, it's kind of interesting to see how these teams actually came into fruition. Like
Nyheim Hines was important there.
Hines was important. Like he really drafted somewhat poorly too, and like Devin Singletary in the 6th.
But like those guys, that's so interesting to see a specific example because we think about 0 RB or like zero RB examples, like specific running backs, and like he didn't really hit on anybody. But like you said, McKinnon had 3 weeks, maybe something like that, to where he was like really, really useful. Singletary had the time where Moss was down, where he wasn't like smashing. But like you're totally fine getting his double-digit points when you have Kelce and AJ Brown and Diggs and all those guys, right? And so he just happened to hit the right Henderson. I didn't even realize that, Pat. I was listening to you and Davis podcast earlier, and like I didn't even really realize that Henderson's had like 700 yards and 6 touchdowns or something last year. So you just don't remember that.
Like Henderson's on most of these teams. Like
he was
just because like he had that stretch, and these are like 6 to 7 running back teams I looked at though, because these were the ones that had the high win rates last year, and I wanted to take a look at like 0 early 6 to 7. Like we've got a Zach Moss, Tariq Cohen, Alexander Madison, Darrell Henderson, Mike Boone team. Like
Jesus.
Like like these teams can have really high end upside. I want to look at some of the hyper fragile teams. So like ignore me for a second while I
one of the things that you when you first brought up, and I don't know what filter you had on, but there were just a ton of Dalvin Cook teams on there, and it did jump out to me that a Dalvin Cook team did not win the tournament, and it was an Alvin Kamara team that won the tournament. But at the same time, like you have all these Dalvin Cook teams advancing, and like how do you beat Dalvin Cook? In that scenario, one way is to have a strong enough team where you're able to carry in the Kamara hammer into the final week. He goes off, you win. But like in that scenario, this year, maybe a guy doesn't score 6 touchdowns in the final week. And how do you beat all of the elite running back teams that make it? Like there's probably going to be a bunch of teams with all the same elite running back that you got to beat. How do you beat them? And I feel like maybe you beat them with a ton of wide receivers.
And it's fine to have that guy, right? Like you're like that. Ultimately, that's what you would want, right? To have more Dalvin, more shots on goal with Dalvin, but like it doesn't work that it doesn't work that way. We have no idea.
Missed those weeks too, right?
Yeah.
Like wasn't that it? He just missed those weeks. Like so, it didn't even necessarily have to be the Kamara team. Like Dalvin just missed those weeks, and this is too where like it's a different contest than the drafters contest, where like these Dalvin teams would have won the contest.
Henry says we beat them with Josh Jacobs.
Ban.
You know what's funny though? I do have to like Josh Jacobs teams made it to the playoffs at a higher rate than average. Like
he was good last year
at a bad ADP. Like just worth throwing out there. That's all. But okay, like here were the top hyper fragile teams, like to just kind of give the other side of the coin, and these generally did outscore the top 0 RB teams. But yeah, so we've got a Kamara, Aaron Jones, David Montgomery, Zach Moss,
Andy
Derrick
Isabella.
a lot of David Montgomery teams. Derrick Henry, Chris Carson, David Montgomery, Zach
Totally want
Moss.
one of these. This is
Like-
interesting to me, dude. Like, because okay, so one's got Carson, and I think didn't even Justin seem to have Carson off the top of my head. I can't remember.
Like, look at this team: Derrick Henry, Todd Gurley, Chris Carson, Jalen Samuels. You know, like
So this is
um,
essentially a one running back team because
two
when
running
did
back.
Carson
Well,
miss? Carson missed time though.
yeah, but like,
Um,
so it's weird. Like, it's definitely weird. And this was a team that, of course, got huge breakout from Diggs, though. It had Kelsey and Diggs and Josh Allen, right? Like, the other players are going to matter, but it is
Jefferson,
interesting
right?
to see like who the running backs are on both of these extreme builds. Because I was saying to Pat too, from the outset, like if you didn't have any data, you might have said it was a bad year for hyper fragile and it was a bad year for zero RB. But yet those structures were both the most winning structures. A lot of Henry teams in here. Derrick Henry, third round Melvin Gordon, Raheem Mostert, and Jerick McKinnon. Is another one. Like,
wow, these are like more fragile than I would have thought, and not as healthy as I would have thought.
yeah, you really. I mean, if this is where I think sometimes we're underestimating the importance of a Derrick Henry type season in some of the best ball analysis. He's
Right.
in a lot of these. Here's a team that drafted Kenyon Drake in the first round, David Johnson in the third round, Devin Single. Is this right? Like, now I'm starting to doubt my data because this doesn't even seem possible. Kenyon
That's a
Drake,
bad
David
team.
Johnson, Kareem Hunt, Devin Singletary. I don't even know
No,
how,
because he's
how
got
this was
he's
possible.
got Devontae, he's got DK, he has Kareem Hunt,
Deontay, Jefferson, right?
And Pat, we were talking about I
Justin
think-
Jefferson. There you go. Yeah,
He has the wide receiver he smashed wide receivers.
Yeah,
he drafted a zero running back team poorly.
With second round Kenyon Drake. Yeah.
Yeah,
This is where Pat, were we talking about Kareem Hunt too? How he had weird win rates, and that's
he
like
had weird win rates.
him on hyper fragile teams. Like, he had a usable score every week out of the sixth
And
round.
him on zero running back
you know?
teams.
Yeah. So, and that's those types of seasons most benefit from either a hyper fragile build or a zero running back build. They don't benefit from a hybrid build. Really.
So what do you think about that? So that's a really great point, and I think kind of how probably all of us really structure our teams. Whether Mike, I think you said you have obviously hyper fragile teams and zero running back teams, but on both of those structures, any extreme structure needs archetypes like that, right? Whether it's Kareem Hunt or whatever, you need an archetype that has the ceiling to win you the league, right? If Chubb goes down, I know it didn't happen last year,
This
but if
last
Chubb
team's
goes
pretty
down,
interesting here. I like the look of this one.
Hunt is the league winner. However, he's also I'm stuck on AJ Dillon now. AJ Dillon has usable weeks the whole year because he's getting touches. But if something happens to Aaron Jones, he's the league winner. That guy fits every single no matter how you build your team, that guy fits every single structure. And so those players are the key, that's the skeleton key, right? It's not even just anything about. So those guys, Kareem Hunt should have a high win rate because he fits every single structure.
Well,
yeah, and Rojo, I'll give Pat some Rojo. I think Rojo fits all the structures this year.
He does.
The hyper Rojo strategy, but he's also fine as your first running back in a zero RB team. He can kind of, unless he gets completely displaced. I mean, he can carry your team as the first running back.
Well, as Eric was talking through AJ Dillon and the Kareem Hunt point, it's you should structure your team so that AJ Dillon's score is going to be important for you every week. That's you don't want to have a team where where AJ Dillon's score isn't hitting your lineup most weeks, because then you've done something wrong. You either took too many running backs overall. You probably took too many early running backs if AJ Dillon type isn't regularly able to hit your starting lineup.
That was what happened for me with I have a lot of Henderson but I kind of thought I would have more. the way that I draft, like I just lived in the Pollard, Henderson, Latavius, Dylan, Zach. I lived in that range so much. Part of it was I have a little more Latavius than I have Henderson, but it was also to your point that I actually think it was like almost kind of like a good thing that I wasn't taking Henderson when I didn't need Henderson, like the type of player that Henderson was, because I know he, what he did last year, but in general, I think we all probably agree that his usability was probably not going to be that high. When, like you said, if I'm drafting AJ Dillon, I need AJ Dillon's score. Henderson is a very different archetype, at least in my opinion. So he didn't fit every single team, and so it was like if you had like 50% Henderson, you're probably just being a dumb drafter. You know what I mean? as opposed to like making sure guys fit the structure that you're drafting for.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I have above average amount of Henderson, but similar thing. I'm drafting Latavius, like even Pollard, I think has more week to week usability than Henderson had. Dylan, I started out drafting a ton, and then I had a stretch of like kind of Aaron Rodgers panic where I like just scaled back on Green Bay in general. And now that that's over with, I've taken a bunch of Dylan again.
I've taken a bunch of Dylan recently too.
Yeah.
The last couple days before the Akers injury, I was really hammering Dylan. So I was a little disappointed because it's in the exact same range as Henderson. But where are you guys on like some of those other guys now? Like now that Henderson's been kind of removed from that pocket, like who are you currently favoring within that? Because it's like that's sort of the range where Henderson was going, where Dylan's going.
I still take a lot of Latavius. One thing I've been trying to do a little bit more lately on the heels of like JJ Zachariason's running back research, I've been taking some more guys in like that 7 to 9 pocket where like I had been taking James Conner at a discount to Chase Edmonds forever. But, JJ's research kind of shows that like Chase Edmonds is a really, really strong breakout bet. So I started prioritizing like him in like late round 7, Mostert in 8. But it depends where like how my team's structured at that point. But losing Henderson definitely makes it a little bit. Drafts are a little bit tougher already, right? Because we lose Akers as an early running back pick, and then we lose Henderson as an option for ourselves in that pocket of the draft.
Henderson did go right before Aiyuk in a draft that pushed Aiyuk to me. So I was he's going early enough where it still helps you a little bit.
And I know you covered this, Mike, not to derail, but I couldn't possibly agree more. And Pat, you talked to Davis about this. I think he was a little bit on the opposite side. Like, I don't think you can draft Henderson in these tournaments moving forward. So I shouldn't say totally. I did a DK draft earlier today, and I got him in the 8th in a 0 RB on a 0 RB team, and it was like at that point, like I literally drafted 7 wide receivers, and then I took him in the 8th, and it was like, okay, what's the difference? I'm still getting a lot of value on the overall field here with him, but like he goes usually. I've been doing more DraftKings the last couple of days, and he's like 4th round pick or something, and I have a bunch of him in like, and DraftKings, his ADP dude was in like the 140s. Like I have like 14th round Darrell Henderson on DraftKings. It's just absurd. And so, but that's not just me, right? There's been thousands of teams like that have like 14th round Henderson. Like there's been enough drafts so far that like, okay, I have my whatever 20 Henderson teams. Now we move on to the next, right? But to your point, I'm struggling. I haven't done a lot of drafts in the last few days. And so I am struggling a little bit because I was living in that range. And when you lose one guy, and I was already taking a lot of those guys, I don't want to have 40-something% Latavius. I don't want to have, I don't want to be completely overexposed to those guys that I already had heavy exposure on. So I have done, like you said, more. I was not taking Chase Edmonds. Now I'm moving it up a little bit to Edmonds, Sermon, even like Damian Harris, Michael Carter, Rojo. Those guys, I've just been kind of moving it up a little bit, and I don't know if I'm forcing it. I guess is part of my reason because I feel uncomfortable now without that extra body.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, this goes to your whole strategy, Eric, of doing like half your teams early, half your teams late, because I feel like we now have one giant piece of information, but no additional pieces of information. So now we're drafting at a disadvantage to, all the teams you already have booked and everything. But eventually we will start to be drafting at an advantage to those teams in some other ways. Like I assume, there's going to be, unfortunately, some other big injuries.
Yep.
There will be Darrell Henderson teams that also have drafted guys who are going to get hurt later. And so once we get a lot more information, then I actually would be probably not like, I don't want to be taking Darrell Henderson in the fourth round or whatever. But then I feel like, maybe, late last week of August, first week of September, Darrell Henderson in the 6th, 7th round wouldn't be so bad because I also know who else to avoid. But right now, if you're taking Darrell Henderson even in the 6th, you're at such a disadvantage, and you don't have any other informational advantage, so you're just kind of conceding value to the other teams.
Yeah, and like the way to look at it too, it's like if Darrell Henderson has the type of season that's going to help your team advance, like all those teams that drafted Darrell Henderson at a discount are advancing, and
yeah,
you're just going to have better teams than you in the finals, and it's just somewhat of a DFS mindset. I do think
not necessarily all of them. If you can get Darrell Henderson at a discount later, much later.
If they sign somebody, if they sign Duke Johnson, and so he has all the hype right now, right? He catapults up to the 3rd or 4th, and then they sign Duke Johnson, or pick a guy. They sign somebody, and now everybody's like, oh shit. Now I don't want Henderson, and he's the same bet. We already know they're going to sign somebody. Nothing has changed, but now he goes in the 7th or 8th. What's really, at least on Underdog, what's really the difference between 10th or 11th and 8th round? I don't know that you're losing that. Like, I don't think that really matters.
That's
but like 11th round and 3rd round, like,
that matters.
That your 3rd round teams are stone dead against the 11th round team.
Yeah, like rounds 1 through 5 is a different game, and like 6 is kind of fringy, and then 7 to 8. At that point, I don't care like that much.
Yeah. Sam's saying he feels like that's why it's better to draft closer to the season in general, so we have all the information. But I don't know. I think it's actually, I did like 4 drafts today, so I'm a hypocrite. But I feel like this today was probably like the worst day to draft because you only have one piece of information that, not having benefited a bunch of similar teams to the way I want to build. Like I want to go in and build 0 running back teams, except now I'm going to be building them, or one elite running back teams. And I'm now not able to get Darrell Henderson, where all the people who think the way I'm thinking, a lot of them do have Darrell Henderson. But if you wait longer, you get all the information. But I don't know. I mean, I think this Akers injury clearly shows the advantage of drafting early as well. And some of those Darrell Henderson teams aren't going to hit other landmines on the way to week 1.
And more. I have some of my earliest teams, like months ago, early May drafts have Henderson, and they have like 16th round Elijah Moore. You're drafting him in the 9th round now. So like it's compounding. Obviously, I also have a lot more dead teams. I've drafted 90 teams in Best Ball in Best Ball Mania 2. I have more. I'm going to have more dead teams out of my 150 than most other people when they draft 150. But I'm also going to have more super teams than other people.
It's not just super teams, but the people you're drafting with early are all drafting early. And if you're trying to advance as many teams as possible, like you don't necessarily get killed on advancing those teams. You're actually your edge on those Elijah Moore Henderson teams within your league. Like your odds of advancing have increased quite a bit on those teams, like just getting through. And I know like we feel a little bit differently on the advanced versus super teams, but it's kind of like a hybrid. It's not like a one or the other type thing with drafting early. But that said, I agree with Pat though. Like now is like a pretty tough time to draft where we're not getting those ADP edges, which Eric was kind of like your whole thesis. Like we're not getting the ADP edges right now. We also aren't getting the casual drafters, and we don't have the additional information. Like I'm drafting some because I constantly want to stay in touch, but I'm probably going to go ham in August when we get more information combined with more casual drafters. That's where the vast majority of my teams are going to come.
Right. You don't get the ADP edge that just naturally happens throughout even us dealing with this sicko, the three of us sickos and all the people in this chat that are like way more into this than everybody else and way more knowledgeable than the casual person. We're just not efficient drafters in May. Like there's just it's just how it goes. You can do as much research as you want. I didn't really know that Elijah Moore was going to become a ninth round pick. I just liked, I liked him, whatever. But so that natural flow of a draft season happens and you get that. And then, like I said, it's like I have Cam Akers teams too. Like it's not like I faded Cam Akers. I actually have more Cam Akers teams than I thought that I did. So that was a little depressing. But that's also part of it. I'm like, I'm willing to sacrifice the Cam Akers teams for the 12th round Henderson teams. Yep. And that's just like the risk that you have to be willing to take. And I believe that upside, especially this year, again, I don't want to keep bringing up this contest because I think people get sick of it. But it is huge. This is a milli maker. I know it's not a DFS milli maker because you don't have to beat every single one of those 150,000 people at once. But the quality of team that's going to advance on, as you continue to move on is going to be tougher. Like Herzig's team from last year probably doesn't get there this year. And so, and I'm that's total me pulling something out of my ass, but it's just a smaller field, right? Mike, you've won tournaments in DFS that we've all done well in fantasy sports. And the smaller the field, the easier it is to win, the lower the score that you need to win. Yeah. And so I just feel some of that, we really do need to make sure that we're taking that into account. And to your point, right now is the peak time of we still don't know shit. We only have we have one piece of information now out of thousands that we're going to get, the Cam Akers thing. We don't know anything. We didn't know anything in May and we still don't know anything now, but it's only good people and the market has gotten really, really efficient. So I've drafted a little bit too, but only on the really soft sites.
Yeah. It was actually the night before the Cam Akers injury, I drafted a Best Ball Mania team that I was very happy with. And I was coming back vacation and kind of getting back in touch with the market. So that felt good. And then I drafted 4 teams today and I hate them all intensely. So yeah, I think you do almost have to just keep drafting a little bit to keep your finger on the pulse of things. But this is definitely probably the worst time. Eric, when did you start drafting? When did you really start heavily drafting?
It was early May. I don't remember exactly when. I know Mike and all the ECR guys had just started to put out more serious content. Not that you guys weren't putting out serious content before, but you guys definitely, mm-hmm. Mike was really posting a lot of his stuff, and I just started to get the itch, and then Josh and those guys started to put out content. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to dive into this a little bit earlier. So it was sometime around early May. And I look back at those teams, not only did I have no fucking idea what I was doing. Some of those teams are so really, really bad, but the ADPs are just crazy. And so it was that was the risk reward. I wasn't very skillful at that time either, but no one was. You know what I mean? We were all, everybody was really bad in all these drafts. Like I said, Elijah Moore was a 16th round pick. All the guys that I'm taking now in late rounds, none of them were drafted. Not literally. The fucking Darrington Evans thing. If I wanted Darrington Evans, you got him. You want Samaje Perine? You got him. I take Mo Alley Cox all the time. Did I want him? I could have had him. Every single guy from round 15 on was free. And the guys we're now taking, Elijah Moore, Michael Pittman, Rondale Moore, even Lance went 2 rounds later than he goes now. They were all free. Everybody was free.
That's it. And do you feel the structures were any different? Were the structures less sharp or?
Yeah, running backs went. Running backs went way earlier, and people were way heavier, and not just not just like hyper fragile teams. It was everybody was taking. It was a lot like everybody was feeling it out, I think, and it was a lot more like that's one thing I think a lot about last year. Like not even just win rates, but looking at some of last year's data. Like obviously, I've read Mike's stuff and other people that have posted on last year's data. I think the market was absolutely horrible at drafting last year, and not just like players or not even just structures, but they drafted like crappy season long managed people. No one had any idea what they were doing with best ball. And so it was like every team was like 3 quarterbacks, 6 or 7 running backs, 6 or 7 wide receivers, 2 or 3 tight ends. And they had 2 early running backs. And then they took another one in the 7th. And, it was just like every team was really, really bad. And I feel like it was closer to that, in May. And now, I mean, that does not exist. Not on Underdog. DraftKings is pretty bad. Drafters is pretty bad. I've seen some of Mike's screenshots of FFPC. That looks pretty bad.
Gotta get on the FFPC. Yeah. Dude, I'm getting like 5th round DJ Moore in full PPR.
Oh my god.
Sometimes I take DJ Moore at the end of the 3rd.
Yeah. It's for me being someone that's likes running backs a little more than you guys. It's like the perfect mix because I can take my early running backs and still get the wide receiver advantage.
How are you playing that? Are you doing hyperfragile on FFPC?
I've done a lot of hero running back so far. Of course, the one super hyperfragile team I started Dalvin, Mixon, CEH, just because the bye weeks aligned, and I like those guys. But that was the one team I was on the clock at like 6:11 when the Akers news broke, and I was like. I did it. I took Henderson, but I was legitimately just going to do a 3 running back team, maybe a really late 4th. And I took Henderson, but I've only done it's harder to, they're $125 a pop. I haven't pumped out a ton. I've done 6 or 7, but most of the teams are pretty nice that you can get there. What's tough, the tight end premium things, there was a little bit of a loop. Where
and the bye week, right? Week 14. I still haven't wrapped my head around week 14 in the playoffs.
Yeah, the week 14 playoffs, but it's really different tournament in the sense that first of all, it's only 4,600 teams, but each of the playoff weeks, you're in a 12-team league that you have to finish top 3 until you get to the end, and then you're in a 12-team league at the end where you got to finish first to win. So you just need really solid teams to get through. You don't need to go absolutely ham. So it kind of fits the way I play pretty well.
Right. You're just going to win through structure. And you obviously have a player. You obviously have a player advantage too. But if you just draft structurally sound, you're even with some misses through your structure's almost assuredly going to be better than if you draft 10 to 20 teams in that, and you're going to advance several teams.
Yeah, I think so. That's the hope, at least. I guess we'll find out.
We'll stop taking Mike Davis.
I
do feel like you played a practical joke on us with that, where you drafted a really sound, very strong structural team with Mike Davis, so we all had to be great team, Leone.
Worked out perfectly. But that was the exact Mike Davis structure that I said is the out. That's it. Where
that's the way to draft Mike Davis.
And that's where in a managed league, I would have never taken Mike Davis there. In a managed league, I would have kept him in the wide receivers. Because
if his floor comes through in that format, that draft,
Leone, do you want to pull that
in that structure, in that format, he can absolutely be legitimately valuable versus Underdog. I don't know if he's ever valuable to you.
I don't think I have a single share of Mike Davis.
I'd have 0. I've drafted Waller. I was shitting on Waller. I have Josh Jacobs teams, and I don't have.
I have Josh Jacobs teams too. I drafted a Best Ball Mania, I think, in mid-June, where I forgot that I had signed up for it, and I came back to the clock at 2 seconds and me desperately trying to click Tyler Lockett, and instead Josh Jacobs was drafted.
So
there's my Josh Jacobs share.
I'm such a degenerate. Right after the Akers news breaks, so I'm sitting here, I'm working here, and the Akers news breaks. I'm like, fire drafts. I'm like, I'm like, get in as many drafts as I can. I just wanted to see, like, worst case scenario, people have picked up on the Henderson thing and they're taking him where he should be going, but some sucker is going to get Akers in the second round, right? And so I'm like, I'm fishing for EV, 10 cents of EV out here, but so that's what I'm doing. I fired too many teams, and so I got like 3 underdog teams up. I'm trying to manage 2 DraftKings on my phone right in front of me. I got two Cam Akers teams.
Oh my god!
I got a CMC. I ruined a CMC team with Cam Akers because I was trying I was EV farming. I was farming for a nickel of EV, and I ruined $40 worth of teams.
I do have that draft board up, Pat.
Yeah, let's get it up.
I did a big dog team last night, and I left after 18 rounds, forgetting that it was 20.
Oh god!
And I actually got auto drafted Taysom Hill in like kind of a fragile 2 QB build, and it was not the end of the world.
How did you like the feel of the big dog compared to this one?
My intuition was completely wrong. I was kind of thinking, Puppy was where things got super wide receiver crazy. And I was thinking like higher stakes. A lot of these guys actually are bigger running back fans, but I was in a really wide receiver heavy room, and I could pull up the draft board, but I thought I handled it okay. But
let's talk about that one. But let's talk about this one first.
Yeah, this is the FFPC one. I knew right away I was in
18 round best ball.
18 round best ball slim. This is just the league, it's not part of the big tournament, but it is somewhat representative, I think, of like how a lot of these drafts have been going. And tight end premium, 1 point per 20 yards passing. One of the bigger differences is it's 2 wide receivers and 2 flex, not 3 wide receivers and a flex, which it does help the running back heavy teams a little bit, but I think like people overcompensate, and then
the ADP is
yeah.
ADP always overcorrects for whatever the running back settings are.
Yeah. So I've drafted out of the 10 spot. I kind of knew I was going to go, especially when it went, the way the draft started. I knew I was in a running back heavy room, and I was going to kind of slam wide receiver early. And
I didn't even realize you took Diggs over Hill, which that's what I'm doing too. But I was that no wide receivers went in front of you. It was all the running backs and the 2 tight ends.
I was really hoping that Adams was going to slip, and I could go Diggs Adams. But I was pretty happy to get Kittle in the tight end premium. What happens in the tight end premium is sometimes it's the bad tight ends that don't necessarily benefit from the tight end premium scoring go too early. So you can get caught in a shitty spot if you don't have a really good tight end, where the longer you wait, you're digging yourself a hole, but like the pick kind of sucks in a vacuum each round. And that's the one wrinkle to these FFPCers that's a little bit tough to.
The tight ends actually lasted longer than where I'm kind of used to seeing them go. I feel like normally by the end of the 11th or maybe the mid 12th, every tight end with a pulse has been drafted.
Yeah, I did have a couple of rounds where I was close to even having Kittle, like taking another tight end to kind of put pressure on the room, and understanding that they can very easily be flex starters in best ball, on a given week, and with the 2 flexes. But I went Diggs, Kittle, Lamb, Godwin, Higgins. Just like slam the wide receivers.
Higgins in the 5th. Oh my god!
Look at this is so foreign. I guess it's a little bit. Have you guys drafted on DraftKings at all?
I haven't.
4
I don't get
over
along
there, not a ton.
with the DK best balls.
It's closer to this. It's not quite. It's a little bit more wide receiver, but like it's nothing like Underdog. You guys would smash too. So like I think the biggest difference is like I'm looking at these like 4th round wide receivers. They go a little earlier than like what I'm seeing like in this draft. But when we get to that next tier, all those guys that got bumped up in this Underdog run, right? Gallup, Mike Williams, Visca, Tyler Boyd, Debo, all those guys that got bumped up, they've not gotten bumped up at all. Like, you're getting all those dudes in 7th, 8th, 9th round. Rondale and Elijah are freely available, like super late.
Yeah.
And so it's like this hybrid between these two formats. So it's really interesting to see this one. What I wanted to ask Mike is, what do you think about the Pitts Kittle, like 2v2 basically? Do you have any thoughts on in this format? Like, I know it wouldn't have worked for you, but like if you went with some sort of 2v2, Kittle, CD versus Pitts, whoever.
Like Pitts Ridley or Pitts Hopkins.
Ridley. Yeah. Or if Devontae was there, would you prefer a Devontae Pitts versus Kittle CD?
I would prefer Devontae Pitts. Definitely. I think I feel pretty strongly about I would prefer Devontae Pitts. But Pitts usually goes even earlier than this in these. Like this is like the latest I've seen him go in these.
That's pretty nice, because I do think he really, really benefits from tight end premium, because I think his upside is through so much volume, like so much volume, like even way more than Kittle. Like if he gets 100, what's his efficiency? What's the target ceiling for Pitts? Like,
I mean, Pitts gets there both ways. Like that's why I really like Pitts, and I don't think he's overhyped. It's like I think he gets there either way. Volume, efficiency, kind of. Like it's kind of neutral for him. Whereas like the tight end premium scoring probably does hurt Kittle, like relative to regular, Waller, it helps. Kelsey, it's kind of neutral too. Like he's getting there in both ways. Actually, I mean, it still helps increase that advantage just because he's so much higher than everyone else. But like Andrews versus Hawkinson, like it helps Hawkinson way more than
not Andrews.
Yeah. Andrews is very Kittle-esque that way.
But yeah, I would definitely take Adams. I don't know what you guys would do out of the two. So, I love that Zeke went second. I had to let Pat know. But I took the 2 pick. I've gotten the 2 pick a couple of times. I went
Kelsey.
I did do one hyper fragile. I went Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, and then like wide receiver heavy. I did another one though today. I started with Kelsey, and the only thing that Kelsey does though is it takes away Pitts at 3-2.
Yeah.
Dink and I did it on stream where we could have been, I think we went like Kelsey, Najee Harris in the third. I know you guys hate Najee Harris, but Pat's eyes are like bugging out. Kelsey, Najee Harris versus, Dalvin Cook, Pitts,
I prefer the Dalvin Pitts 2v2, even though I would take Kelsey at the. So that's interesting because in this particular draft that we're looking at here, I would absolutely, if this is the norm, I would absolutely take Kelsey because I feel really, really comfortable about where I'm going to end up at running back. I mean, CEH went 3-3.
I gotta find my CMC team for you. My first team I did in this, I started CMC, Ridley, AJ Brown. Like you can get some pretty crazy starts.
That's really nice.
Ridley at the end of the second.
Yeah,
because this isn't a typical room with the pros versus Joes. There's some of the FPC trends, but not. It's not like truly typical, right?
It's not truly typical, but it's somewhat close. I mean, as far as where the wide receivers are available, I guess. And you will see teams that go very, running back heavy early, which again, like I don't hate hyper fragile, but like Josh Jacobs as your 4th running back, like it kind of defeats the purpose of taking Josh Jacobs.
Which is what's the purpose again?
I don't think I have any Josh Jacobs, but like I'm not going to eviscerate someone for taking Josh Jacobs.
No, I have more Josh Jacobs than Leone, and we're making him defend. We're making him defend Josh Jacobs.
Like a 6th round Josh Jacobs, I'm not going to eviscerate. This is where
I'm so much more comfortable with Leone being the running backs guy. I can't tell you how uncomfortable it was when Leone got to pull his 0 running back card on me. I hated it.
Dude, the Josh Jacobs bit is maybe better than the wide receiver. I don't know what Josh Jacobs has on people on Twitter, but people get so angry if you bash Josh Jacobs. And the reply is every single time you'll guess what it is. It's like, well, what's wrong with 250 guaranteed touches in the 5th round, bro. It's like I don't even know how to reply.
Yeah. There's no good options. Leone, you want to pull up the big dog draft?
Yeah, I want to see the big dog.
Yeah, assuming. Yeah, I'm technologically savvy enough. I'll pull this one down for right now.
What pick did you have?
10. I did this with my neighbor Dan. We split it. So there's some of his influence here, but we're pretty in line. It's the influence is more like on specific player 1v1s.
Do you guys get together and have beers and talk about your favorite 5th round running backs?
Basically.
Mike Davis. And...
How do I bring up the draft board on a completed team? Can I do that?
I think you can.
I actually don't
Let's
know.
see. I'm going to one of my completed teams and seeing. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed with the fact that you were in a wide receiver heavy room. That kind of takes away some of the appeal of.
Yeah, I was really expecting it to be a bit more running back heavy. I was kind of jacked for it. I mean, I can pull up my team, but it's
I don't see how to pull up the board.
Yeah, I don't either. All right, Underdog. We need that added.
So it's 20 rounds, which again we left and we auto drafted Taysom Hill and Jerick McKinnon in the last 2 rounds.
Not bad.
Taysom's fine on this team.
Taysom was. I was texting Dan. I was like, that might have been the optimal pick on this team.
I've started taking them a little bit, and like I said, I'm drafting on DraftKings a little bit more, and God, they're obsessed with quarterbacks. People are obsessed with quarterbacks. So every time I try to set something up for late, it like never works, and so I get backed into it. It's like, do you take Mac Jones or Taysom Hill? Like, I guess give me the guy that can run at least.
Yeah.
So we were out of the 12 spot. We took JT at 12. We were gonna probably go wide receiver if JT didn't fall, but pretty into JT. And then we took Hopkins. It was Hopkins versus Ridley. I think I might have taken Ridley, but regardless, similar structure. And the idea was like we didn't know what type of room it was yet, and we just wanted some flexibility. And it ended up being a very wide receiver heavy room. So we hit DJ Moore, Cooper Kupp at the 3-4 turn. We were really hoping to get Kyler at the 5-12, but that didn't happen. And I think we went Mark Andrews. I'm taking a lot of Andrews or Hawkinson at the 5-6 turn, where I think the receivers are going like a little bit too early and not that much difference than the ones later. But you can see like we took Robbie there, and it was like almost like a clear Robbie pick. So it was definitely wide receiver heavy.
Yeah.
And then went right back to wide receivers again. Marquise Brown, Will Fuller. So it was like definitely a hero RB build with Taylor, and then started to fill it out from there. I don't know how you guys feel about like naked Justin Fields, but we were really like dying on QB upside. So we took the naked Justin Fields, and then we have a double.
Yeah. You have to sometimes when you don't have any paths to upside and he falls. It's just, what are you going to do?
I want a running quarterback. Like I feel strongly about that. So if I need to, sometimes I'll do a little backdoor stack with Daz Newsome or something, which is, probably throwing away an 18th.
Are you doing Daz over
Goodwin?
Are you doing these guys over Anthony Miller? Is Anthony Miller really going to get cut?
I'm doing him over Anthony Miller. I think they hate Anthony Miller.
Why do they hate Anthony Miller? Am I wrong about like every time I watch him, I feel like he's a capable.
I don't think it's stuff
receiver.
that's happening on the field. I
think it's got to be.
Makes sense. Yeah, because they've been pretty consistent in their hate for this guy.
Yeah, I have too much Anthony Miller like in very early drafts until like Pat DMs me athletic comments one day. He goes, "You might want to adjust your Anthony Miller rankings. He might be cut." And I did, and I have not drafted him since. I got to get one Flash Goodwin team going. But
yeah, I know he is kind of fun too.
Probably might have done it on this team had we not screwed up the round 20. Might have taken him over McKinnon, but
good old dead legs McKinnon. By the way, earlier we were talking about who's the running back guy. I just want to note that Ben was on the stream earlier. He had to drop off. He was dropping off to go draft a team with Sean Siegel and Davis Maddock. And I can tell you who's the running back guy in that room.
Davis.
Davis in every round, past round like 3, it's going to be like, the running back option's pretty good here.
Dude, I listened to you and Davis's. I was like nonstop listening to there was so much like new content from everybody that came out today. So I'm just listening to all this. I listened to you and Davis's podcast, and God, it just is going to sound like so much hate towards Davis, but the way that I've seen him draft and like his love for so many of these running backs, when he lumps himself into, he's like, I'll come on the stream and me and you can be the 0 RB guys against I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? You're not a 0 RB. You take 2 running backs at the start of every draft. What are you talking about? Like 0 RB. I've watched your drafts. I've drafted with you.
I think CEH is his most owned guy. So
that's fine. But
yeah,
I
don't have enough CEH. I think CEH does have quite a bit of upside. So
yeah, he needs. I've taken mostly Gibson. I'm trying to look at I definitely don't have enough CEH. I've taken mostly Gibson in that.
The CH thing truly feels like a leak to me, where like I'm willing to take Gibson over some of these wide receivers, and then like the thought of taking CH over AJ Brown and DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, it's like I just don't want to do it. But then I'm like, I'm wrong. I'm really wrong one way or the other. Like I need to be doing both or none. The Gibson,
right?
Like the fact that I feel okay doing it with Gibson and not CH is a problem.
They're the same.
I'm just
bet,
not sure.
Right? It's the same bet. It's the
exact
same bet.
Yeah.
Except one plays with Mahomes. Except one plays on the Chiefs.
And one's cheaper. So I should actually feel more comfortable with that guy. So yeah. So I need to either stop drafting Gibson or start taking CH, and you know which one I'm going to do. I'm going to start taking CH.
What do you think about that? What do you guys think about that? Like in terms of managing those exposures, like what's the right cutoff point, right? Like I want to get paid off if Gibson comes through, but I don't want to be over invested in Gibson. But it's like when a draft breaks, if Gibson's the best available player, like how far do you take it? Like, obviously you don't want to have like 50% Gibson, but like, and I don't even have that much Gibson, honestly. But like at what point are you like being really cognizant of that decision?
I'm pretty nihilist with this stuff. Like I've multiple times, and I do mostly slow drafts, but I've definitely checked my exposures and just taken a guy I had least exposure to. I'm trying not to get really above 30% on anyone.
Yeah, I had a draft. I did this again where a draft started and I didn't realize. This time I caught it after 2 picks, and it was a Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb start, which I never draft Nick Chubb. But I was like, happy that I was like, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, like I can work with this. And now I have a Nick Chubb share. Like I wouldn't have done it myself, but I guess my answer is that I'm probably going too hard on the guys I like, and to the point where an auto pick actually felt like a gift.
And in the hyper fragile builds, like you want it to mix exposures, like because you don't know who's going to stay healthy. I'm looking at the top running backs that were in those hyper fragile builds from last year. This is all hyper fragile builds. I should sort it on like the good ones. Hold on. Come back to me. I want to sort it on like the good hyper.
Well, it had to be. It had to be. I mean, Dalvin was. I know Kamara. It's another thing we get hung up on Herzig's specific team, that he just so happened to be the only guy to sneak a Kamara team through, and then Kamara has the biggest week of any player of the entire season. But Dalvin was the league winner. You basically needed because Dalvin was a 2nd round pick. I sometimes think people forget about that, even. Like, and maybe I'm also overvaluing that thing, but like that was a really, really helpful strategy for me. Is like Dalvin was like my favorite. Like if like Gibson is now that guy, but Dalvin was like, okay, this is the guy that I see that I want to like base my early round running back strategy around. And then I did a lot of the same thing that I'm doing right now, like pairing him with all these flyers or like whatever, kind kind of whoever, Pat, you talk about it like with just late round guys that you're like, okay, who's my flavor of the week here? Yeah. But I kind of do that at running back the rest of the way, right? Like I wasn't always drafting AJ Dillon, and now I'm like trying to take AJ Dillon in every draft.
Yeah.
But Dalvin was kind of that guy. And so it's like, I really feel like the payoff when you're right about Dalvin, and that's why I'm really hung up on Gibson, is like, yes, I understand CEH or CMC, and I really want to, I would love to have as many CMC teams as possible. But like, I don't really feel the need to draft even like Kamara this year when I can get Diggs, Kelsey, or Tyreek and pair him with a guy who I think is how different of a bet is Gibson or CEH, or pick your guy, right? If you like Najee, or you like Mixon, or you like Aaron Jones, or whatever, how different are they truly? Like, how different was Dalvin truly from Zeke last year? I don't know that it was that different, but those first round receivers are very, like, I love Metcalf and Jefferson and stuff, but they're not Diggs and Tyreek.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, like with the Gibson thing, what I don't want to do with Gibson, despite the Taylor Chubb thing, part of the reason I was okay with the Taylor Chubb thing is that I haven't been doing probably as much hyper fragile as I should. I've been doing more, especially as the wide receiver ADPs have gotten like higher and higher. I've been moving more to zero running back to make sure my wide receivers are still super strong. But I also have just throughout this whole thing been a real fan of the one elite running back structure. But with if I'm going one elite running back and I'm moving off Gibson, I think the last thing I want to do is just like build those teams around like Chubb, or build those teams around Eckler even. Like I don't want to just say I got to mix up my exposure to the elite running back. Like I think that's okay, but I'd rather just move to a different build than because I just don't see it with, maybe I'm missing something.
Hyper fragile build, I think, is what it comes down to. You guys just don't want to take two running backs early.
It's true. Yeah, we have brands. We have a brand to uphold here. We can't be caught taking all these running backs.
Just I don't know if this is interesting to you guys, but of the top 20 percentile hyper fragile teams, like so hyper fragile teams last year, every single iteration of them was good. By win rate and by top 1%.
What's your hyper fragile definition?
So 4 running backs taking at least one early.
Okay.
So whether it was 1, 2, 3, or 4 early, they all did well. The top 20% of these teams, there are 420 of these teams. 26% of them had Aaron Jones. 24% had Derrick Henry. 20% had Dalvin Cook. 20% had Alvin Kamara. 17% had Todd Gurley, 15% had James Conner. So you can start to see though, like where, again, like these guys don't need huge seasons. Where if you can just like piece together enough, and I know like part of the running back hate is like they're replaceable and like they don't necessarily score that well, but like that's where you're leveraging that by only taking 4 and just like letting it
you're just using the score, right? You know that intuitively. So like whether James Conner gets 8 points or 16 points, it's like that's valuable to me that he's coming, I'm getting whatever that score is.
Yeah, it's not going to be on my bench. And again, the wide receiver rooms were like a little bit different last year, which is something you pointed out, Beimfohr, where you were getting better wide receivers deeper. It was more like FFPC, where I got FFPC as like my 8th, 9th receivers in the one draft. I got Gabe Davis and Rashad Bateman at the 14-15 turn. Like, like that's not happening in Underdog. And that did happen a little bit last year on Underdog. So, so I do think that's a point. Like, I don't want to overstate that point because, like, I asked Herzig about that, and he did kind of point out, like, some of the late round receivers, and they, like, were kind of the shaky, like, going into the season. They weren't as shaky as they were this year, but they were probably a little shakier than we remember.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. My struggle is that they get shakier faster. Not even just that, like, your 18th round pick is shaky. It's that, like, we just talked about Elijah Moore. I love Elijah Moore. I love Rondale Moore. I love some of those guys in that range. But these are also the archetype of a player we used to take far later than the 9th round.
Yeah.
Like, Elijah Moore was never a 9th round pick before. And I know he hasn't been he only is now. But, like, you need Elijah Moore in the 9th round. He can't just be like the rookie upside bet when you're taking him in the 9th round in a hyper fragile build, right? If I'm taking him as my 7th wide receiver in the 9th round, it's a very different scenario to I took 4 running backs and an elite quarterback, and God forbid you took an elite tight end. It's like Elijah Moore's your wide receiver too. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Well, this is like the thing is the room moves towards wide receivers. It doesn't feel like a zag, but I think the zag is to move more to wide receivers.
I agree.
It's like, and Leone, on the stream today that you guys did for ETR, like you were mentioning, like, what if you just got locked out of running back? You'd probably be okay. But if you get locked out of wide receiver, you will not be okay. And that's kind of Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's kind of where we do come to some agreement is like, I'm doing hyper fragile builds. Like I'm not, for the most part, I'm not doing like 3 running backs out of the gate. You know, if I'm doing 3 running backs out of the gate, I'm stopping at 3. Yeah, I'm doing a lot with 2 and I'm doing a lot of hero, but I'm doing a lot of like the hyper Rojo, you know, kind of give me 2 early, give me Rojo, and then give me like a flyer late, like those types of ones. And like as we went through like these really good hyper fragile teams, you can kind of see where that makes sense. Like the really good hyper fragile teams weren't like 4 super high end running backs. Yeah.
So
well, that's like what. So you mentioned like, you know, you can see how basically these guys, they give you your usable weeks and you don't need that much. But like with Todd Gurley being on so many of those teams, I just pulled up his game log. He scored 12.5 points in week 9. The next highest score was week 16. He had 6.5. He just did nothing the rest of the way. Like,
but this is where too, like in terms of advancing, now this is also like a different, like the team you have at the very end of the season versus advancing. But in terms of advancing, his first 6 weeks were fine, you know, like or whatever. And that matter. And that like buys you time. And those points count the same as week 13 versus week 1.
He had 2 games above 20 points. He had another game at 18 points. He had a game at 12, 14, 10, and 12 again. So he did have some usable weeks.
And good weeks. Like that.
Good weeks, yeah.
You probably would be shocked to hear that he had those fantasy point performances.
When I looked up and I saw he had a 23 and a 21 point game, I was shocked. I will say I could not remember that. Yeah. 2 touchdowns in both those games. The thing though that I'll say is that like I do feel that even with those usable weeks, like this is the type of production that you can find in like the 10th round right now. Like you can get probably a couple 20-point games out of like Gus Edwards going to fall in the end zone twice, you know, at 2 different times this year. Don't you think? Like the Todd Gurley stuff makes me feel like you can, like your approach of making them even more fragile is the correct approach, because when I see those teams, they have Connor, they have Gurley, like they weren't perfect with their early running backs, you know?
Yeah, I guess this is kind of like, it depends where you draw the line. I'm kind of saying the fact that you don't need him to be perfect is okay, and that kind of makes the strategy work. And you're kind of saying like, if I don't need him to be perfect, why don't I just take him later where I know they're not perfect?
And then I get another guy who's going to score more points early on.
And that's where it's just kind of tough. And like, I think if you were to actually map out the probabilities, those guys going earlier are still going to like matter a lot more than those guys going late. Like, and it's tough for us to do that.
It depends a little bit
how it's going to break, but
right. Yeah, it depends a little bit. But the guy, if you go too late, I agree. But like, there's that range, you know, with Rojo, like, AJ Dillon, Gus Edwards, like those guys are gonna do. They're basically like gonna have Todd Gurley-esque seasons. You know, like I don't think they're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, we think.
But even if if you don't get those 2 20-point weeks out of Todd Gurley, like, is that the difference for those teams not advancing? Like, part of it just makes me feel like you just don't need that many points at running back. Like, you can get by with hitting on a couple running backs, taking
this is where, like,
their low weeks.
But this is part of too where those running backs are riskier. Like, you probably disagree that they're riskier just because kind of like the perspective, but
they're risky because we didn't know Todd Gurley was total dust for sure entering last year. We thought he might be,
and there is like some value to that early season role. And again, this is too like a little bit different playing the tournament versus a regular league because, you know, those Todd Gurley teams that advanced had a dead player in the playoffs, you know, and
with draft capital.
Yeah. And that's not good. You got to count on your first 5 rounds going correctly. You're not hoping to get the Todd Gurley season. It just kind of, the point is it's not a death sentence. And I do think it's a little bit easier to grab that quantity at the wide receiver position. Like, there's a little bit more volatility week to week. I think you'd be surprised at how few running backs drafted would have that type of season that Todd Gurley had in those rounds. Like, I'm curious to look at the ADP from last year. Like, I'm going to pull up the ADP from last year.
And so this is like a good lead into where, and I think it actually was probably mostly just like miscommunication when we were kind of debating the hyper fragile approach earlier in draft season. And it's really funny because I have like a ton of hyper fragile teams based on your definition that you said earlier of hyper fragile, but my approach was wildly different, like say to Herzig's. It was closer to yours, but it was even more fragile than yours. And so it's a very loose construct, but in general, it would be anchor running back, right? Pick one of the first 2 rounds, running back. You know, obviously I've mentioned plenty of times that my preference is like a Gibson, but you know, if you get the 101, it's CMC. And then somewhere in that like 8, you know, the like Trey Sermon, Mostert, that range to Rojo, Dylan, Gus Edwards, whatever. So instead of doing like the Gurley, instead of going in either with an early back or dipping in the dead zone for that second back, I'm pushing it just a little further for that second guy and being like, all right, Gus, you're my guy. You know, I'm going to take Gus Edwards' score. And sometimes it's going to be 4 points. And that's just, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I'm just taking your point. And then tacking on some of the upside guys. Right. And part of that was my draft approach, right? Like I said, like when you're drafting in May, I was trying to embrace this Akers situation, right? Like knowing that I'm probably going to have hits on guys like Henderson just built in. So I wanted to build in that extra fragility with those running backs. But that was kind of how I was doing it, is like, okay, give me Gibson and then give me Trey Sermon and then give me Henderson and then give me Darrington Evans. And that's my fragile group. It's like way more fragile, but it's the exact same methodology. And like I said, it definitely had something to do with like overall draft approach. But I think that was my preference for this tournament. Instead of the Gurley, it's like a hybrid between what you're saying and what Pat is saying. Like kick the can down the road on Gurley because I know I can find. I'm willing to risk a few points to try to find Gurley with AJ Dillon, you know, at a cheaper cost.
Yeah. Just like, and for some perspective, this is the ADP end of last year. It wasn't right before the season. I don't have the exact date I say, but towards the end of the season for Underdog, these are the running backs in order, ADP 80 and above. James White, Zach Moss, Tevin Coleman, Jordan Howard, Marlon Mack, Phillip Lindsay, Latavius Murray, Tariq Cohen, Matt Breida, Chase Edmonds, Kerryon Johnson, Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, Damian Harris. Like I mean, there's like 90% zeros there, you know? Like so that's just the perspective I'm trying to these guys look good now. And some of those guys we would not have taken. I know,
Yeah.
like some of those guys we would not have taken. But like I do think that perspective is important. And this, like, we haven't even got to pick 120. So like we're not even out of round 10 yet, you know?
Yeah.
Like we're not out of round 10, and these are the guys.
But I will say, like, Zach Moss. So I just pulled up Zach Moss randomly. Zach Moss had a 20-point game. He had 3 other games above 10 points. Like, I don't know. Like, you probably still were better off with Zach Moss than Todd Gurley.
Well,
Probably.
if he stayed healthy, you absolutely would have been better off with Zach Moss.
Yeah, I mean, probably.
And Zach Moss was more or less a bust. But it's like, just because of your opportunity.
But it's also like easier for me to like you still did cede points to Gurley, probably in the best over the course. Like you still ceded a decent amount of points, and like obviously in that example, like Gurley being like mid-third round, like yeah, I would have rather had Zach Moss, but it probably was a lot closer than you think in terms of how it worked out, you know, and because I'm having, you know, an extra wide receiver spot probably, and just the way the wide receiver distributions work out. And like some of these guys were like stone zeros though. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, Breida and Howard, you know, and I was drafting Breida and Howard, you know, ambiguous backfield. Like those guys I was drafting. I probably wasn't drafting much Marlon Mack, but
yeah, what do we pay Gretch for? He was supposed to tell us that his college mate Myles Gaskin was
Pete
the guy
and
there.
Davis
and
did a pod with Patrick Laird, and he said it was Gaskin. We actually all have the information.
That's true. And Matt Breida's ended up in like the 8th round. Like it was like a situation like all these backfields right now. And yeah, we had the information. What's the fucking point of Davis and Pete if we can't use their connection to get a league winner?
Well, they did stream this. I mean, it was on the internet for us all to see. I have to say,
it's available for all of us.
Yeah, we could have all gleaned it, but we did not.
That doesn't tell you about how dumb this game that we're playing is. It's like someone gave us the answers to the test, and we were still taking the wrong answer.
We're like, no, it's
in the 8th round. Yeah, and these it's bum veterans that have never done anything.
It's gonna be this guy that I think is terrible, not the guy I haven't heard of that you like, Patrick Laird on the Dolphins. What do you know? Yeah. I guess to complete this comparison, Leone, I guess it'd be like the wide receivers in that range versus the wide receivers, you know, going in the Zach Moss range. Because I guess what I'm wondering is like how much, if you just zeroed out Todd Gurley on those teams, like how much did it even hurt them? Because I think what I'm wondering is if these hyper fragile teams are really working because they had Alvin Kamara and Aaron Jones full stop, and that's what they needed to get right.
That's still 2 guys, though, guys.
You know, I know it's
still 2 guys.
I know it's still 2 guys. I mean, but I'm saying like with the hyper fragile thing, like it's more of like the hyper rojo thing where you go 2 running backs and then save your other 2 running back picks for really late, or go 1 running back. You know, like just
I'm doing more of the hyper rojo, but like the flip side is, you know, some of the other really good hype, you know, Jonathan Taylor was on 15% of these teams, you know, and he was similar ADP as Todd Gurley. So if you just said, and Chris Carson was on a decent amount of teams, like if you're saying like just cut out that 3rd round guy, it's easy if it's Gurley, but if it's Taylor, like that made your whole season, you know, especially if it was, you know, you just had a kind of boring Josh Jacobs in round 2.
What do you think? One thing, I kind of mentioned it earlier, just that I really believe, and I don't have a ton of, you have better insight into it than I do, that I just believe that the way people are drafting is so much different. And not that people were doing hyper fragile builds, but that like what we're talking about even right now, like how far should you kick the can down the road on RB2 was not something that people readily discuss. Like the market still drafted like at their home league, you know, in the draft, like, oh, I don't have a second running back by round 4, better take Chris Carson, you know, and like that's
stopping at 4 drafted. Was like that alone was kind of like revolutionary. Like, oh wow, I'm gonna only take 4.
Yeah, and so that was like a lot of my counterpoint at the beginning of the offseason. I was like, to you guys, like you and Herzig, it was like, what you guys landed on was fucking genius, but we need to take it further type of thing. Like we're not taking it fragile enough. And like, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but I think part of it, like, how much do you think it was just the fact that that's how people drafted? You know what I mean? Like, they would never ever do what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, like, there were teams that did like 1 or 2 early and 4 total, and they were shakier in terms of like floor, but like the actual win rate was just as good, and the top 1% was better, and I'm in line with you on that. Like, that's what I'm doing. But like, more directly to your point, like how people were drafting last year, I do think there was a big edge in that the majority of the draft room was just taking too many running backs and just devoting too much capital to the running back position in general. So by basically saying I'm only going to take 4 and I'm still going to have good running backs, I have basically the same good running backs as you, but I've devoted less to the position.
Yeah.
I have a more volatile build, which when you're trying to finish first or even second out of 12 is better. My distributions are going to be inverted. Yours are going to be like this. And that's, that's the distribution of finish that we want. That's why we're winning more frequently than you are.
Do you think, so that's another question along this exact same premise that I've really struggled with. Do you actually think that a 4 running back team, even with a little more fragile, like we're talking about that we're doing this year, do you really think it's less safe than what these guys? So we've established running back is not a safe position. The bus rates, Pat has informed us all of how insane the bus rates are on all these early running backs. And yet the perception is that if you leave your draft with 6 running backs and you have 3 in the first 6 rounds, that your team is safer, as opposed to your team that you drafted that has 4 total running backs and only 1 in the first, however many rounds. What do you like? How do you, if someone brings that to you, how are you kind of framing that question?
Wait, so what's the compare? Like, wait,
people, this perception that this 4 running back perceived to be fragile team is less safe than the 2, 6, 7, 3 build or whatever.
That annoys me quite a bit, because I quite often get the, you've stumbled onto a good strategy ... for tournaments, and I'm like, no, this is good for your 12 team league too.
Exactly.
Essentially, the bet you're making is that your early picks are going right. You only need 4 running backs, and if that happens, you want to optimize around that so that you have a really good team. And if it doesn't happen, you're probably losing anyways. Like, that's
right.
Overly
the bet you're making when you take an early round running back is that it works out, because if it doesn't, you're probably screwed. No matter what you do next.
Zeke last year, right? Zeke, you took Zeke. He didn't even get hurt, and you lost. And full stop. It was over if you took Zeke.
And that's where too. I mean, the win rate stuff gets tough because it depends. And Hersey was talking about this, like, so much about the guys drafted around you, because you took Zeke, you didn't take Dalvin. You took CMC. Not only did you get an injured season, but you didn't take Derrick Henry.
But you should, like, Derrick Henry didn't have such a big season. Derrick Henry had like around 20 points per game, and Zeke had he had 15.5 points per game. The fact that you couldn't make that up, like, to have such a low win rate from Zeke, like,
but Zeke had like way closer to like a Todd Gurley type season though. Like, I mean, it was almost like he got hurt, with just how bad things ran. I know you really don't like Zeke, but like, just with Dak getting hurt, with the offensive line getting hurt, I mean,
it's not about Zeke. I'm saying he had 15.5 points per game. Like,
but the way it was distributed, it was basically like he played half the season.
Yeah, I'm pulling up his game log. He did have quite a few. But I mean, it actually was distributed in a way I think would be okay for best ball. 24,
and also
18,
like
12, 22.
Like 20 points per game versus 15 is a big difference if you're counting on using that score every week. Like, what's 5 times 13? Just for like, that's 65 points you've seeded.
Yeah. It's a big difference, but it's like you're still getting 15.5 points per game. You would think that you'd be able to make that up better than people were able to make it up. Like it still does strike me that it's a blows a bigger hole in your team than you would intuitively think. Given that he wasn't dead for you, he was producing some pretty good weeks for you.
I mean, if the running back you take at like pick 4 does that, you're probably in trouble.
Right.
But you just fast forward that to round 2 and it's much less the case.
And it gets much less the case. Yeah. And you've kind of proved that quite well. Yeah. Like, I mean, we can poke holes in the Gurley thing all that we want, but the further you move down,
right,
the floor of what you need from that guy, just by him serving that purpose in your lineup is far less. Like I said, there's a different discussion around what happens in the playoffs and the utility of that player in the playoffs. But just getting there is there's a value in that player. And to your point, like we knew Gurley's role basically, right? Say whatever we want about what we thought about Gurley or the value in that role. It's hopefully Mike Davis is better than Gurley, but it's a similar thing to Mike Davis that we know that he has this role. And like, there's just going to be just getting the ball that much. And on an offense like that, you're just going to score points. Like, it's just not really possible not to score points. And so like, we can discuss in week 17, how valuable he's going to be. I have no idea, but like just being out there on that team, like he just has to score points. We can pipe dream about AJ Dillon all we want, but like he might play 20 snaps and touch the ball 4 times,
Right. He might be Tony Pollard from last year and have like one big game and not really do much else. Leone, do you have the 3 running back builds by any chance?
Now we're talking.
They did not do well.
Shit.
There were so few of them. There were 106 of them. They didn't do that well. They had a good top 3 rate, but then a bad league win rate, and none of the 100 teams were in the top 1%. But I know I had a couple. Like I only drafted like 15 teams last year, and I had like 2 iterations of Kamara, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor. Those were definitely like live. I haven't done it a lot this year because I've done a couple with Swift, but because Swift could be Jonathan Taylor.
The 3rd round's horrible,
but it's bad. It's pretty bad. I think I only did it with Jonathan Taylor.
Those teams not doing well is a counterpoint to what I'm saying, right? Like if you're like you just need, I guess, like is that too fragile? Like you just need some points to be hitting your lineup over the course of the season.
I don't know. There was just so few of them that like it's really hard to tell. And if it was super fragile, then like why was their top 3 rate? They technically had the best top 3 rate of any RB construction.
Really? Okay.
But that just shows you that we're in Eric's point this out. We're dealing with really small samples of one specific year. Like
how many of those teams had Justin Jefferson on them, and all the guys. It's like.
And that makes no logical sense that this build would have the best top 3 rate of any construction and 0 top 1% teams. And if 2 of those teams have been top 1% teams, we would look at this build and say, holy shit, look at this top 1% rate. It's like nearly 2%. It's like double what it should be. But that would literally be like for all we know, it's like 2 teams scoring 5 more points than they did.
Right.
Right. So
or just those guys employing that strategy with any 2v2, like they could have stumbled on the nuts. Maybe we should all be drafting 3 running back teams,
right? And
it is the right thing to do. But last year we didn't. None of those guys hit the nuts. I mean, maybe Herzig's team should have been a 3 running back team for all that we. I'm not saying that that's true, but you know what I mean. Like we just it's really that's my. I maybe come off as an asshole sometimes, but that's sometimes. We get overconfident in those things, and we just don't know like anything.
Right, we don't know. It's wide open, and I mean these win rates too. Like they're pretty tight too. And like I was arguing with Mike Beers a little bit about stacking earlier, and it was like I could be right on that it was better, but if you look at the actual differences between the stacked teams and the non-stacked teams, like I think it's clear that stacking is better and more important, but it's like you're talking like 8.4% versus 8% win rate. Like we're really living on the edges here. And it's the same thing with the construction stuff. Like we're really living on the edges. But that's part of the reason why I wanted to try the 3 RB team on FFPC, because you just can't get 3 running backs like that on Underdog. And that's the only way I would try it, is if I get 3 backs that I think could all be, round 1 backs next year.
Well, so that's why I brought up Chris's comment for a second, that he had a lot of 3 CMC teams. And I would imagine that maybe not, but a fair amount of the 3 running back constructions probably would have had a CMC, because that's when you do 3. You're like, I got CMC. Yeah. I mean, that's when I want to do it this year, is when I have CMC, because I'm like, I want to maximize. I know I've got the running back 1 slot locked up. I'm literally just looking for a second one. If I also get a guy fairly early, then a 3 running back construction makes a ton of sense. So it's another one of those things where we're evaluating this in the context of a year where the 101 went down.
And and not just the 101. He's the 101, and like we love Dalvin, but like the gap even from Dalvin to CMC is so huge, and the gap from CMC to all these other dudes is so huge that the value of him like makes that 3 RB build so strong. And I was thinking about this, that I have like maybe 1 CMC 3 RB team, and like I was doing this crazy fragile, like let's totally punt off running back 2 and load up on all these wide receivers and quarterbacks and whatever. And like I feel like I missed the boat on that potential 3 RB build, and just building in a little bit better, RB2, RB3. I have I stumbled across some Henderson teams, so I guess that worked out. But it's like, man, if you did CMC, and even if you went down deep, right, like to ETN and like Sermon or something, like, God, you could just have an absolutely monster team with 11 wide receivers in CMC,
So just like randomly, but 25% of the 3 running back teams, like taking 1 running back early and 3 total, there were 143 of them total. 25% of them took James Conner. Oddly, 22% took Jonathan Taylor. 20% took Aaron Jones, but we did get CMC's up there at like 15%. Chris Carson's 14%. But
these are 1-2 turn teams, right? Because that's where Connor was going. That's where they're in the front half of the draft.
Yeah, they might be middle because Carson's in here. Connor, I was getting mid 3 some of the time.
Yeah,
early on.
That's true. His ADP moved up.
And like Taylor was like mid late 3.
Yeah, so. we all drafted him and moved his ADP up, and
yeah, we all
bombed, absolutely tanked.
Yeah. Okay, so the running backs, but I guess that would be an argument against doing the strategy in the first place, is that like if you have 3 running backs and one of them's last year's James Conner,
it's over.
Maybe it's over. But if you have a 4 running back build, because Conner was on what? Like he was, you said it earlier, but it was something like 15% of the
And like let's also keep in mind that some of these players, like hyper fragile, like Gurley was on a lot of hyper fragile teams, period. So he's going to be on a lot of the top hyper fragile teams, because like some of those teams are just running into Kelsey, running into Justin Jefferson, that sort of thing. So like I'd have to do some like further analysis to like actually see like the leverage, but
that's always my struggle, is like, we talk about it in DFS. It's like if a $4,000 running back is 75% owned, like especially in a smaller field or something like that, like he might be in the winning lineup and be still a super minus EV play. Just so many guys have him, and like, yeah, he has a floor, right? The $4,000 guy scores 12 points, but like, you're fading him was actually the right move. It's just that so many of your opponents had him, you might not have beat their team. And so I struggle with that. I struggle with that a lot too, looking at some of this data. With a lot of people, like you said, the Gurley thing. It's the Gurley thing. Gurley's in a lot of these teams. We have no idea if that means anything about Gurley. And we don't even really know what that means about this structure. It's just like,
like Gurley is going to be on some good teams and some builds. He just like it's just going to happen. but he didn't like totally kill the build. But we don't know if he didn't kill the build. Maybe it had nothing to do with him, like Pat said. But like it does. At the end of the day, though, like if you look at the hyperfragile data from last year, it could be different. That's what Eric was saying. Like you can poke holes in it, like like we could have replaced Gurley with Moss, or like, but like at the end of the day, like all the 4 RB teams, whether they took 1, 2, 3, or 4 early, all did super well, and then teams that took 0 early and like that did well took 6 or 7 running backs. So like there might be a point where we push like fragile, hyperfragile too far. Like it's possible that we're doing that.
Yeah.
Even if we don't feel like it. I mean,
yeah. I think I'm with Eric though, that it's like the room is changed, like because this is new, for a lot of people, like, I've never thought about best ball like this before. Like, and I think a lot of people are in that same boat where, now you're looking at constructions and I think overall they're sharper. Overall people are no one's taking like the 6 running backs with a lot of them early and, then the 7 wide receiver. That's a lot less common. And so I just feel like there's like less margin for error. And when there's less margin for error, typically my move is to prioritize wide receiver. Like the sharper the room gets, the more I want to be over to the wide receivers. So that's kind of why I keep trying to think of like, what can we do? Like another option might be to say like with a hyper fragile build, take that 3rd round running back and use like your 15th and 17th round picks on running back. So now you're up to 5, but you brought the draft capital way lower. So, like just different pivots that you can make, because clearly there's something with the structure that worked. I mean, the structure worked really well. There's something with the idea of the structure, the philosophy that's really sharp, but the ADP has shifted. So there's like I'm just trying to like think through potential pivots on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's shifted a ton lately. Like let's see what happens in August, but the teams you were drafting at like the very beginning, it wasn't that much different.
Right.
Part of it too is like we have more running backs that are good this year too. In theory, good, like on paper. We had
This
all
year
the
it's
rookie.
different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just objectively added more running backs to the top of the draft this year. Pre Akers injury, you added Akers, Taylor got bumped up. You added Swift, you added Dobbins, you added Najee Harris. Like you added more guys than you took out.
And then you add in all the handcuffs. Everybody has a handcuff. It's like the draftable pool grew like absolutely a ton. And then you mentioned we have. I feel like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys will correct me. I feel like we have more ambiguous situations with like the Jets. It's like they got 3 draftable dudes.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, none of us even, I feel like everyone knows the Chargers have a second back who's going to be like legitimately really fantasy valuable, at least at cost. And there's 3 dudes who it could be. We have no idea. And they don't even really get drafted. And it's like, there's a lot of those. Maybe I'm just stuck on this year, but it feels like there's just so many of those situations too.
Atlanta would be another big one.
I think
we're confident in Mike Davis. Is it because we're confident in Mike Davis, or is it because we just have no fucking idea?
Yeah, we were confident in Jordan Howard. We were confident in Matt Breida. Like we're confident in a lot of things.
But is it because
I think
JV and Hawkins
situations last year, though? I don't know. Yeah. Like we come up with those every year. We have a 0 RB list we like every year.
Yeah,
and stop besmirching Mike Davis, okay?
We couldn't just let you get away with having us compliment
He's
your
gonna
Mike Davis
catch
team.
balls and he's gonna score touchdowns, and that's all that matters. He doesn't need 20 plus carries.
All right, Mike, take us out on Russell Gage's usable week.
Oh God, please no.
Russell Gage is fine. This is honestly what I want to do, but I need to set it up right. But look at, I'm trying to figure out the way to do it in like a really unbiased way. But like honestly, look at wide receiver distributions with like within the best ball scoring and like what the top 3 wide receiver weeks look like. I think it'd be very surprising to people like what you can manufacture out of guys that are just constantly seeing the field and just on there.
It's funny. Sorry, Pat. I was just going to say that like it's a long running bit now between everybody that's really into best ball, right? Like the running back thing, wide receiver thing, Mike Davis, Josh Jacobs, like all this bullshit. And like, I, have become more of the, like Mike and I, everybody perceives us as on totally like opposite sides when in reality we're like so similar. And like I draft, not Russell Gage. I'm not that much of a sicko, but like I draft a lot of those dudes. Like Pat, you talk about Jacoby Myers. Give me Jacoby Myers. I don't need the, deep ball guy like that. I feel like that's what people's perception always is when you say like, oh, I'm swinging for the fences. It's like, actually, no, like I draft Cole Beasley and I draft Jacoby Myers and I draft Sterling Shepard. And, like I draft these guys because to your point, I think 100% people would be so surprised at how the scoring actually works on those player archetypes.
And with Gage, like I was getting Gage at like round 14 earlier in the offseason. I think what happened with Gage is Julio left and he got bumped up when he should have just stayed the same. Like, like he is who he is regardless. And he was fine in round 14 and, he shouldn't have been moved up. He's moved up. And if he slips, I'll take him. But that's the other thing in August, when we get more clarity on some of these depth charts, some of these super boring guys, like if Adam Humphries is clearly the slot guy for Washington, like I think we're going to start getting.
Yep. You're correct, but it's so gross.
But like, I think we're going to start getting more of those guys. And that's where like part of the reason I'm waiting too, is I think the hyper fragile builds will be easier to do in August between more casuals drafting and then like more certainty on the back end of the wide receiver depth charts.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's good.
Yeah.
But
all right, guys, I think we should leave it there. Thanks everyone for sticking with us with extra long episode here.
I gotta get to bed.
I didn't think we'd go this long, but we did. Do all the things, like, subscribe, join the Discord. Discord is, ask anyone here in the comments about Discord. It's like I love being in there. The conversation in there is just so good. You can have these types of conversations throughout the week in the Discord. So jump in the Discord, and we will see you next Wednesday as soon as I can get the outro music up.